Hey there, story lovers, this is Wizardium, and we're bringing you an epic adventure. What if ancient magic crowned Harry and Hermione as its sovereigns? Hit like, subscribe, and let's begin this journey. Chapter 1, the naming the castle was still burning when it happened. Not burning the way it had been, not the fiend-fire-drunk inferno that had eaten the room of requirement and taken half of the 7th floor with it, but burning the slow, exhausted way that things burn after a catastrophe, when the worst is over and the wreckage is just settling into itself. Small fires in broken windows, smoke climbing out of collapsed corridors. The great hall's enchanted ceiling, cracked along one edge, cycling through whether it could no longer quite control, showing half a sunrise and half a thunderstorm at the same time. Voldemort was dead. Harry knew this the way he knew his own heartbeat, that particular hollow absence in the back of his skull that had been there so long he'd stopped noticing it, and then suddenly wasn't. He was standing in the middle of the courtyard with Tom Riddle's body 30 feet away and a wand that wasn't his in his hand, and he felt like someone had removed a weight from behind his eyes that he'd been carrying so long he'd stopped calling it a weight. People were crying, people were cheering. Somewhere behind him he could hear Ron making a sound he'd never heard from Ron before, something raw and animal and grief-soaked, and he knew without turning that Ron was thinking about Fred. He couldn't look at that yet, he couldn't look at any of it. Hermione found him before he found her. She came out of the crowd like she always did, purposeful, direct, already reading his face when she was still 10 feet away, and when she reached him she didn't say anything at all. She just put both hands on the sides of his face and looked at him, and the look said, "Are you actually here? And I was so afraid, and don't you dare do that again," all at once. Her eyes were red. There was blood drying on her collarbone from somewhere. He didn't know when she'd been hurt. "I'm here," he said, because that was what the look was asking. "I know." She dropped her hands. "I watched you die, Harry. I got better." The laugh that came out of her was almost a sob, and she pressed her lips together and looked away, and he thought not for the first time that Hermione's courage was a different kind than his. His tended to come out in the moment, hot and instinctive, but hers had been running cold this whole year, methodical, maintained, like a fire she'd been feeding with sheer will because the alternative was too terrible to consider. He didn't know which of them had the harder task. "Ron's," she started. "I know." She nodded. Around them, the surviving Order members were beginning to organize, which mostly meant that Kingsley Shacklebolt was moving through the crowd with the kind of quiet authority that didn't need to announce itself, directing people, checking on the wounded, already thinking 3 steps ahead in the way that good leaders always did. McGonagall was helping Professor Sprout carry someone Harry couldn't see clearly through the smoke. Luna Lovegood was sitting cross-legged in the grass 20 feet away, completely alone, looking up at the cracked ceiling as though it was telling her something interesting. Harry sat down on a piece of collapsed wall. It was the most deliberate thing he'd done in hours, choosing to sit, choosing to stop, and his legs were grateful for it in a way that suggested they'd been planning to stop on their own soon anyway. Hermione sat next to him, close enough that their shoulders touched, and that small contact was more grounding than anything else had been all night. "What happens now?" she asked, not rhetorically, genuinely asking him. "I have no idea," he said, which was the most honest answer he'd given to anything in months. She considered this. "We'll figure it out." Yeah, the fires continued to settle. The sky continued its confused performance. Somewhere in the castle, something shifted, some structural thing, some beam or buttress, and there was a sound like a held breath finally releasing, deep and old and fundamental. Harry felt it through the soles of his feet and didn't think much of it because the entire building had been making alarming noises for the last 6 hours and he'd run out of alarm a long time ago. Then it happened again, deeper, and then the ground moved, not an earthquake, nothing violent, nothing tectonic. More like the earth exhaling, like the stone was breathing. Harry stood up without deciding to, and beside him Hermione did the same, and they both looked around trying to find what had changed, what new disaster was beginning, and then they looked at each other because they both felt it at the same moment, something looking at them. Not a person, not a creature. Something enormous and patient and old, turning its attention toward them the way a mountain might turn its attention toward a bird landing. The light came out of the ground, gold but not like firelight, like something that predated fire, like the color that gold was imitating when it decided to be gold. It came up through the cracks between the flagstones, not blinding, not aggressive, just present, seeping through the courtyard's broken floor and climbing the walls and gathering around Harry and Hermione specifically, drawn to them the way water runs toward the sea. People were noticing. The courtyard, which had been filling with the cautious sounds of aftermath, crying, talking, someone calling for a healer, went progressively quieter and then completely quiet in that special silence that large crowds produce when every person in them decides to stop breathing simultaneously. Harry looked at his hands. The light was pooling in his palms. "Harry," Hermione's voice was steady, but she grabbed his arm with both of hers, and he could feel her heartbeat in her grip, quick and strong. "No," he said. "Do you actually know? Because I don't. I have absolutely no idea what is." The magic spoke, not in words or not exactly in words, but in a way that left something like meaning in the back of his mind, the same way a dream leaves an emotion when you forget the images. It felt like being read, like something turning the pages of him very quickly, looking for a specific passage. He heard Hermione make a sharp sound next to him and knew it was happening to her too. It lasted perhaps 30 seconds. Then the light gathered itself, pulled together from the walls, the floor, the air, and poured into them. Into both of them simultaneously, a current of it entering through the top of his head and pouring down through his chest and settling in his bones like heat. Harry expected pain. He expected the familiar sensation of magic moving through him under pressure, the way it felt during very powerful spells. He got neither. He got clarity. Like the moment after you've been crying for a very long time and the grief is still there but the noise in your head has stopped. Like coming up from underwater, like the first deep breath after weeks of shallow ones. He stood in the middle of the gold light with his arm pressed against Hermione's and felt, for the first time in longer than he could remember, like himself, not the boy who lived, not the chosen one, not a weapon or a symbol or a sacrifice. Just himself, but more like a lens that had always been slightly unfocused, suddenly going sharp. The light faded. The courtyard was very, very quiet. Kingsley Shacklebolt was the first person to speak, because Kingsley was always the first person to speak, and he said very carefully, "Harry, Hermione, are you all right?" Harry turned to look at him. Kingsley was 20 feet away, his wand at his side, his expression doing something complicated that resolved into a kind of professional calm over whatever the actual feeling was. The rest of the survivors, 30, 40 people, were staring at them with expressions ranging from awe to terror to the blank incomprehension of people who have already exceeded their catastrophe quota for the evening. "We are fine," Harry said. The words came out different than he expected, not louder, not harder, but with a weight behind them, a certainty, like striking a tuning fork that doesn't waver. He felt Hermione straighten beside him when he said it, like she'd heard it too. McGonagall, coming through the crowd with one hand pressed to a wound at her side that she was determinedly ignoring, looked at them with an expression Harry couldn't quite name, not fear, not worship. Something more like recognition, the look of someone seeing something they'd read about once a long time ago and never expected to actually see. "The sovereign binding," she said, and every person who heard it went still because the way she said it made it sound like capital letters, like history, like something that was already over and done with and being written down even as it happened. "The what?" Ron said. He'd come through the crowd and was standing behind Kingsley, hollow-eyed and grieving and still, because Ron Weasley, in the middle of his worst pain, still showed up. McGonagall was looking at Harry and Hermione as though she'd been struck by something. "It hasn't happened in over 1,000 years, she said. "We thought the text said it was dormant, that the conditions could never." She stopped, pressed her lips together. "We need to get inside, both of you." "We're not going anywhere yet," Harry said. Not unkindly, just clearly. McGonagall blinked. It was possible no student had ever said those words to Minerva McGonagall in her entire career in quite that tone without immediately regretting it. She looked at Harry for a long moment and then, to her considerable credit, she nodded. "No," she agreed. "I suppose you're not." Hermione stepped slightly forward. She was still holding Harry's arm, but the grip had changed, less grounding, more anchoring, as though they were a unit now in a way they hadn't been before. "Minerva, what exactly is the sovereign binding? All of it, not the version that's in the textbooks." Something that might have been pride and might have been sorrow crossed McGonagall's face. "The ancient magic, the original magic, the force that underlies all wizarding power, occasionally names someone, chooses someone. In all of recorded history it's only happened 7 times, and it's never before named 2 at once. So what does it mean?" Hermione pressed. "Specifically, what has it done to us?" "Nothing that wasn't already there," McGonagall said. "That's the important thing to understand. The binding doesn't grant, it recognizes, it takes what is already in a person and removes the ceiling." The silence that followed this was thoughtful. "Right," Harry said. "Okay." And somehow, impossibly, that was the right response. Not because it minimized what had happened, but because it accepted it. And Harry saying okay to something unfathomable was, at this point, one of the most predictable things in the universe. Hermione turned to look at him, and there was something in her expression that he'd never seen before, not surprise, not calculation, but a kind of tentative recognition, as though she was seeing something in him now that she'd always known was there but couldn't quite look at directly. "We should still help with the wounded," she said. "Yeah," he agreed. "Come on." And they walked back into the wreckage of the Great Hall together, side by side, the gold light completely gone now but the weight of it still there in his bones, and the crowd parted for them without anyone deciding to do it, because sometimes your body recognizes what your mind is still catching up to. The Great Hall in the aftermath of a war looked nothing like the Great Hall he'd been eating breakfast in for 6 years. The long tables were still there, or most of them, but they'd been cleared and commandeered for the injured. And the light was wrong. One side of the enchanted ceiling had given up on weather entirely and was just showing a kind of ambient silver glow, which was actually better for working. Madame Pomfrey had set up a triage area near the doors and was moving with the kind of exhausted efficiency that suggested she'd been working for hours and had no intention of stopping. Harry and Hermione walked in and immediately separated to be useful. He went to help move a fallen beam that 3 people were struggling with. She went to Madame Pomfrey and, Harry suspected, immediately started providing information that was more useful than any of the medical staff expected. That was the thing about Hermione. She was always useful. Comprehensively, unstoppably, sometimes irritatingly useful. He shifted the beam. He was stronger than he'd been, which he noticed in the abstract way you notice whether registered, filed, not dwelt on. For the next 2 hours he helped. He moved things, summoned things, conjured water and Dittany when they ran low, held a tourniquet on someone's leg while a healer worked, sat with Lavender Brown's parents while they waited for news. He didn't think about the binding, he didn't talk about it. He wasn't avoiding it, he just had things to do, and the things to do were in front of him, and when things are in front of you, you do them. Around 4 in the morning, when the most urgent work was done and the hall had settled into the quieter rhythms of sustained care, he found a corner near the teacher's high table and sat down on the floor with his back against the stone, and Ron dropped down next to him with 2 cups of something hot that turned out to be an enthusiastic approximation of tea. "How are you?" Harry asked. Ron was quiet for a moment. "Fred's dead," he said. Which was an answer to the question and also not an answer to the question, and Harry understood both meanings. "I know," he paused. "I'm sorry." "Yeah," Ron stared at his tea. "Mum's, she's in the next room, she won't leave him. George is with her." He paused again. "Charlie's here, came through the portkey from Romania about an hour ago." He didn't even know, he said the dragon he'd been working with went still around the time it happened, just stopped moving for about a minute and then started again like it was listening to something. He laughed, short and humorless, thought that was worth including. Harry looked at him. "Ron, are you going to be all right?" "I don't know," Ron said. "Probably, eventually." He turned to look at Harry. "Are you going to be all right?" "Because Hermione told me what happened out in the courtyard. Or she told me what happened as she understands it, which means she told me approximately 40% of what happened and the other 60% requires a book she doesn't have yet." Harry almost smiled. That sounds right. So, he thought about it honestly, about the clarity, about the thing that had moved through him and left him different. "I think so. I don't feel like anything is wrong." "I feel like something is," he paused, looking for the word, "more right than it was before." Ron considered this with the pragmatic seriousness that was one of his most underrated qualities. "That's either very good or very terrifying, probably both." "Cool." Ron drank his tea. "You know the Prophet's going to have an absolute field day." "The Prophet can go to language," Hermione said, appearing out of nowhere and sitting cross-legged on the floor in front of them in the way she had of materializing when the conversational relevance was high enough. She had a book in her hands, a small old-looking thing with a cracked spine, almost certainly liberated from somewhere she hadn't technically been authorized to access, and she was reading it with the focused intensity of someone who had found what they were looking for. "Where'd you get that?" Harry asked. "Dumbledore's office. McGonagall let me in." She didn't look up. "It's called the Sovereign Codex. It's one of 3 known copies and this one is the original, which is notable because the other 2 copies are missing sections." She turned a page. "There are things in here that are going to take days to fully process." "Good things or bad things?" Ron asked. "Both." She looked up. "There have been 7 sovereign bindings before this one. In all 7 cases, it was a single individual. In 6 of those 7 cases, the individual died within 5 years." She met Harry's eyes. "The one exception lasted 23 years and fundamentally restructured the wizarding world before dying of natural causes." "And the others?" Harry asked. "What killed them?" "The other 6, 3 were killed by political forces who feared the power. 2 made decisions that broke the binding itself, essentially renounced it, and without it they were." She paused, looking for the word. "Unsupported is the term the Codex uses. The power they'd been given needed the anchor of the binding to exist. Without it they collapsed. And the 7th, killed by magic itself." She said it simply, the way she delivered information she'd processed intellectually but not yet emotionally. "The Codex describes it as the Sovereign attempting to use the power for something fundamentally contrary to its nature. The magic withdrew and the resulting void was fatal." She closed the book. "Think the fact that there are 2 of us this time changes the odds, but I want to understand why before I'm confident about that." "You found this in 2 hours," Harry said. 2 hours and considerable stubbornness." She tilted her head. "The book also says that paired bindings are theoretically possible but have never occurred because the conditions require 2 individuals who are," she hesitated very briefly, "whose fundamental natures are in resonance." "What does that mean?" Ron asked. "It means they complement each other at a foundational level, not similar, complementary." Her eyes were on Harry, level and precise, like a key and a lock. The metaphor sat in the air. "Right," Harry said. He was looking at her too, the way you look at something you've always been able to see but only just now developed the vocabulary to describe. "Right, that makes sense." Ron looked between them with an expression of immense, carefully maintained neutrality. "Great," he said. "Super. That's all very clear. Does anyone want more tea?" Neither Harry nor Hermione answered because they were still looking at each other, not with any particular drama, but with the focused attention of 2 very intelligent people recognizing a truth simultaneously and deciding, without words, how much of it to look at right now. "Tea," Ron said definitively and stood up. Dawn came incrementally, that particular exhausted dawn that comes after disasters, where the light seems apologetic, as though it knows it's arriving too soon. Harry had slept for perhaps 3 hours in a corner, using his cloak as a pillow, and woken to find Hermione already up and writing notes in the margins of the Codex with the focused industry of someone who had decided that sleeping was a later problem. He sat up. His back ached. Clarity from the night before was still there, quieter now, settled deeper, like the first morning after recovering from an illness when you realize your head is clear and the realization itself is pleasant. Morning, he said. There's something on the third chapter, she said without looking up. About the physical changes that accompany the binding, minor things the codex says, but I want to cross-reference. Hermione. What? Good morning. She looked up, took in his expression, sat back slightly. Good morning, she said more softly. How did you sleep? 3 hours of unconsciousness. You? About the same. She looked at him properly and he looked at her, and they had a silent conversation that covered a great deal of ground in very few seconds before she said, we need to make a decision about how to handle the next 12 hours. Kingsley is going to want a meeting. There will be press. There will be ministry officials. There will be… I know. Every person in this building who has feelings about what happened last night, which is all of them, and some of those feelings are going to be problematic. And we need to be… Hermione. She stopped. We're going to be fine, he said. And the words carried that same weight as the night before, that tuning fork certainty, and he watched her process it, watched her run it through every layer of her very formidable mind and come out the other side not reassured exactly but settled. Like something finding its footing. You can't just say things with your new voice of absolute certainty and expect me to stop thinking, she told him. Did it work? A pause, a little bit. I resent that. She closed the codex. The point is we need to decide now before we're in the room with Kingsley and the others what position we're taking, because right now everyone is still in shock, and in shock is actually the best time to set the terms, he said. Exactly, he nodded. He was already thinking about it, about the difference between walking into a room and letting the room define you, or walking in and making the room adapt to you. He'd spent most of his life doing the first. The clarity in his bones suggested strongly that he was done with it. We don't apologize for what happened, he said. We don't minimize it, we don't act uncertain about it. We answer the questions we choose to answer and we redirect the ones we don't. And the hollow court. She said it like she'd known about it for longer than one night, which meant she'd found something in the codex. What do you know? Enough to know they'll be moving fast. She met his eyes. There's a passage in the codex's appendix, I think it was added later than the original text, different ink, that describes a group called the Custos Antiqui, the Old Guardians. They appear in the historical record every time there's been a sovereign binding and every time they've attempted to dissolve it. And succeeded, twice. She said it without drama, which accounts for 2 of the 6 failed bindings. Harry was quiet for a moment. All right, we deal with Kingsley first, the hollow court after. Hermione looked at him with an expression that was part assessment, part something warmer, something that she kept in check with approximately the same effort he used to keep his more dramatic instincts in check. You know, this is going to be considerably more complicated than defeating Voldemort. Voldemort was trying to kill me. This is politicians and old families who want to control something they don't understand. He stood up, straightening his clothes in the way that didn't achieve much but felt purposeful. At least it'll be a different kind of problem. You're disturbingly calm about all of this. I've been dead. It recalibrates your threat assessment. She almost smiled. Fair enough. She stood too, tucking the codex under her arm with the possessive instinct of a woman who had claimed a book and had no intention of giving it back. Shall we go start terrifying politicians? He extended his arm. Not gallantly, practically, naturally, the way you extend your arm to someone who is walking next to you and always has been. She took it the same way. They walked out of the great hall and into the uncertain dawn of the morning after everything changed. Kingsley Shacklebolt found them in the corridor before they found him, which was probably intentional on his part, because Kingsley operated best when he controlled the venue of a conversation. He was waiting at the junction of 2 corridors near the main stairs, alone, which Harry noted and respected. No ministry escort, no official posturing, just the man himself with his robes still dark from the previous night's work, and the look of someone who had also not slept. He looked at them for a moment with an expression he kept carefully neutral. Minister, Hermione said. I'm technically acting minister, Kingsley said, given that Voldemort killed the last 2, a pause, but yes, close enough. He looked at Harry. I've had 6 people describe to me what happened in the courtyard last night. The descriptions are consistent. Good, Harry said. Kingsley's expression did something careful. I need to understand what we're dealing with. Both of you, before anything else, before the press, before the Wisengamot, before the inevitable disaster of the next 48 hours, I need to understand. What specifically? Hermione asked. The sovereign binding. He said it the same way McGonagall had, like capital letters, like history. What it means for your abilities, what it means for the balance of power, what it means for every institution the wizarding world currently runs on. He paused. What it means that there are 2 of you. Harry looked at him steadily. What do you already know? Kingsley raised an eyebrow slightly, the way a man does when he's been asked a question he didn't expect. The ministry has texts on it, historical accounts. It's classified at the highest level because every previous minister thought the information too dangerous to make widely available. Which means you know exactly what it is, Hermione said. You're not asking for information. You're asking for reassurance. A beat. Kingsley's expression shifted into something that was, beneath the professionalism, almost amused. You know, when Albus used to talk about you, he consistently underestimated you. Most people do, Hermione said pleasantly. What reassurance are you looking for? Harry asked. That this doesn't break everything we're trying to rebuild. Kingsley said it directly because directness was his native mode even when the instinct was to hedge. The two people now carrying the most significant magical force in living memory are not planning to, I don't know what verb to use here, overturn, redesign, declare themselves above oversight. Oversight by whom? Harry asked, not combatively, genuinely. The ministry that spent 6 years either ignoring Voldemort or actively serving him. The Wizengamot that's currently half full of Death Eaters who managed to claim Imperius. Kingsley was quiet. We're not your problem, Harry said. We've never been your problem. The problem is that the wizarding world needs to be rebuilt from the ground up, and it's going to take years, and the people who are supposed to do it spent the last decade building something broken. He paused. We want to help with that, both of us, but not as symbols you deploy when it's convenient and contain when it's not. Kingsley looked at them for a long, considering moment. He was, Harry thought, a genuinely good man, not perfectly wise, not without blind spots, but good in the foundational sense, the kind of good that actually costs something to maintain. That was worth respecting even when they were going to disagree. I can't tell you I'm not going to push back, Kingsley said finally. On specific things, specific decisions, when I think you're wrong. We'd expect that, Hermione said, but pushing back is different from trying to manage us. Harry met his eyes. We're not going to be managed, Kingsley. That's not a threat, it's just a fact. The binding doesn't make us dangerous to the right people. It makes us exactly what we've always been without the apology. Kingsley held his gaze for a long moment. Then he nodded once with the precision of a man making a decision he's committed to keeping. All right, he said. Then let's talk about what happens. More actions request aborted. Write the next chapter now. Chapter 2, The Weight of Gold. The meeting Kingsley called happened at noon in what remained of Professor McGonagall's office, because the headmistress's office above was structurally compromised, and the ministry's portable conference room, a charmed tent that unfolded from a briefcase, felt too much like establishing territory, and Kingsley was smart enough to know that territory mattered right now. McGonagall's office was small for 8 people. Harry noticed immediately that Kingsley had chosen his attendees carefully. Minerva McGonagall, Arthur Weasley looking grey and hollowed out in the way of parents who have buried a child, Percy Weasley standing very straight behind his father's chair in the way Percy always stood when he was holding himself together by sheer structure, and 2 people Harry didn't recognize. A small, dark-haired woman with the look of someone perpetually running calculations, introduced as Octavia Fenn, deputy head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, and a very old wizard with silver eyebrows and the serene expression of a man who has outlived most of his emotions, introduced simply as Aldrich Senior Unspeakable. No press, no Wizengamot members, no one with an obvious agenda beyond the immediate situation. Harry revised his estimation of Kingsley upwards slightly. Hermione had the codex on the table before anyone else had sat down, which established, without a word, that she'd already done more research than anyone in the room. Harry had watched her do this before, the precise, non-aggressive territorial act of the prepared person, and had always appreciated it even when it drove him mad. Before anyone briefs anyone, Harry said once the room was seated, I want to know what the ministry's official position is going to be, not eventually, today. Octavia Fenn looked at Kingsley with the expression of someone who hadn't expected to be pushed that early. Kingsley himself simply folded his hands on the table. That's what we're here to determine, he said. I know that's what you said you're here for. I'm asking what the default position is, what gets said if we walk out of this room without an agreement, because that default is going to shape every conversation we have today, and I'd rather know what we're working against. A silence. Percy shifted. The old unspeakable Aldrich had been watching Harry with his serene expression since the moment he'd sat down, and he didn't stop watching now. The default, Kingsley said carefully, would be a statement acknowledging the extraordinary events of last night, expressing that the ministry is monitoring the situation and recommending that all citizens exercise calm while the relevant authorities conduct their assessment. Which sounds, Hermione said, like we don't know what this is and we're hoping it goes away if we don't acknowledge it. The ministry has historically responded to unprecedented magical events with, badly, Harry said. The ministry has historically responded to unprecedented magical events badly. He said it without heat, which was somehow more effective than anger. We all know this, it's not a criticism, it's just the record. He looked at Kingsley. We're not interested in being monitored and assessed. We're interested in making the transition out of wartime as functional as possible, which is going to require the ministry and the sovereigns to be operating in the same direction. The word sovereigns landed in the room like a stone dropped in still water. Arthur Weasley looked up. Percy's pen, he'd been taking notes on something, stopped moving. Even Aldrich's serenity shifted fractionally. Hermione picked it up without missing a beat. That is what we are, not what we're claiming to be, what the ancient magic named us. Pretending otherwise doesn't serve anyone and wastes time we don't have. The Hollow Court will move within 48 hours. We need to be ready. The Hollow Court, Octavia Fenn said very quietly, and the blood left her face in a way that told Harry the name meant something to the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. You know about them, Hermione said. We have a file. Fenn's voice was controlled. They've been a low-level concern for about 60 years. We didn't think they were active, not operationally. They are. Hermione opened the codex to a page she'd marked. In every previous case of sovereign binding, they've appeared within 72 hours. They have 3 historical methods of approach: legal challenge through the Wisengamot, direct magical assault, or political pressure through alliances with established families. She looked up. I'd expect all 3 in that order, with the assault coming when the legal challenge fails. You got all of that from one night with this book, Kingsley said. I read quickly. She closed it again. Minister. We don't need the ministry to approve of the binding. We're not asking for permission. We're asking for partnership, which is a different thing. The difference is that a partner's concerns get heard and a managed asset's concerns get filed. We'd rather be the former. Kingsley looked at her for a long moment. Harry watched him think, actually watched the process behind his eyes, the weighing, the assessment. He was doing the thing that good political minds do when they recognize they're in a room with someone smarter than the situation they prepared for. What do you need from us? He asked. 3 things, Harry said. First, the ministry's public statement confirms the sovereign binding as a legitimate and recognized historical phenomenon, not a crisis event. Second, we get full access to every relevant ministry file: Hollow Court, sovereign history, the classified text you mentioned last night. Third, we attend the Wisengamot's first session after the Reconstruction period, not as witnesses, as sovereigns. Percy made a sound that he immediately suppressed. The Wisengamot will, Fen began. Object loudly and try to stall, Harry finished. Yes, we know, that's fine, they can object. He looked at Kingsley. But they'll have already had 2 weeks to watch us help rebuild the wizarding world before that session, which will make the objections considerably harder to sustain. Aldrich, the ancient unspeakable who had said absolutely nothing this entire time, spoke for the first time. His voice was the kind of deep, unhurried voice that made everything sound like it had been true for centuries. You've thought about this carefully, he said. We've thought about it since about 3 this morning, Harry said. But yes. May I ask you something that isn't on anyone's official agenda? Harry looked at him. Something about the old man felt different from everyone else in the room, not threatening but significant, the way very old trees feel significant. Go ahead. Can you feel it right now in this room? He gestured slightly, taking in the space. The state of the magic in this building, the injuries in the walls, the places where the castle's own enchantments are damaged. Harry paused. He had been aware of it in the same background way he'd been aware of the ache in his shoulders or the quality of the light through the windows, present but not dwelt on. Yes, he said. Interesting. Aldrich folded his hands in his lap. And you, Miss Granger? I can, Hermione said. Her voice was slightly different, the way it got when she was engaging with something that had captured her genuine intellectual interest rather than her strategic mind. It's like hearing a chord with a few notes missing. The North Tower specifically, and the corridor above the library. She paused. It's been wrong up there for longer than last night. There's something there that... She stopped, looked at Harry with an expression that said, we'll discuss this later. Aldrich made a small sound of thoughtful acknowledgement and said nothing else. I'll agree to your 3 conditions, Kingsley said, and the room adjusted around the words, everyone recalibrating. With the following understanding: when we disagree on something significant, and we will, the disagreement goes through conversation before action. Both ways. I won't move against your interests without telling you first. And we won't act on anything that directly concerns the ministry without a conversation first, Hermione said, except in a time-critical emergency. Define time-critical. We're being shot at. Kingsley almost smiled. Accepted. He extended his hand, not in the formal ministry way, across the table, direct, human. Harry shook it. Then Hermione did. And the meeting, which had started as something Kingsley intended to control and hadn't, was over in 40 minutes. The press found them on the front steps of the castle at 2 in the afternoon. Not a few reporters, a crowd of them, apparating in from the moment the anti-apparition jinxes on the grounds began their collapse, which happened piecemeal through the morning as the castle's protective enchantments relaxed their war footing. Someone with a quick quotes quill had already filed 3 stories, judging by the first edition of the Evening Prophet that Ron came running with, looking deeply amused in the way of a man who has decided that finding things funny is the only sustainable response to today. The Boy Who Lived ascends GINGR 2. Sovereign binding returns after a millennium, ministry in TALKS, the headline read, which was at least more accurate than Harry had expected. Could have been worse, Ron said, handing it to Harry. There's a sidebar, Hermione said, reading over Harry's shoulder. Experts debate whether sovereign binding constitutes a threat to democratic wizarding governance. They've already found 3 people willing to say it does. Wow, 3 whole people in one night, Ron said. That's basically a movement. In wizarding politics it might be. She handed the paper back. We need to talk to them, the press. I know, Harry said, controlled, brief. You do most of the talking, they respond better to you, but I set the frame at the start. The way you want to frame it. The binding as a service, not a seizure. We're not taking anything from anyone. We're obligated to something larger than ourselves, and that obligation is to magic itself, which is to say it's to everyone who uses it. She said it smoothly, the way she said things she'd already argued through in her own head. It's accurate, it's reassuring, and it preempts the power grab narrative before it takes hold. And if they ask about the Hollow Court, we have no comment on specific groups. We're aware of the historical pattern and we're prepared. She paused. No more than that, we're not giving them a story about an enemy, we're giving them a story about a mandate. The enemy story comes later if it has to. Ron had been following this exchange with his arms crossed and his head tilted, the expression of a person reassessing something they thought they understood. You two, he said slowly, have gotten extremely terrifying overnight. We were always terrifying, Hermione said. We just had lower ceilings. Ron pointed at her. That right there is the terrifying thing, he sighed. Right, do you need me to run interference on the crowd? Actually, yes, Harry said. Keep Skeeter specifically away from the left flank. She'll try to circle around during the— Harry, do you think this is my first time running interference on Skeeter? I've been doing that since 4th year. Ron straightened up with the dignity of a man who has developed a genuine area of expertise. Go talk to your press. They went down the stairs and into the crowd, and Harry did what he'd always hated doing, stood in the center of attention and talked. But it was different this time, different in the specific way that the clarity in his bones had made everything different. He wasn't performing confidence. He wasn't managing his presentation. He just said what was true in the order that it was true, and the certainty in it was not the certainty of someone who has rehearsed a speech, but the certainty of someone who has stopped being uncertain. Hermione spoke first. As planned, 3 sentences that set the frame so efficiently that 3 separate reporters tried to knock it over and couldn't find purchase. Then Harry answered questions for 15 minutes, and the crowd that had arrived expecting something exploitable, a traumatized teenager, a triumphant symbol, something to shape into a narrative they'd already written, encountered something that wouldn't be shaped, and it threw them. You could see it happening. The quick quotes quills kept starting sentences and crossing them out. The one question that landed was from a young reporter Harry didn't recognize, earnest-faced, slightly terrified at having been called on. Mr. Potter, do you know why it was the 2 of you? Why you and Miss Granger specifically? He looked at her, thought about Hermione's phrase in resonance, thought about the feeling in the courtyard, that sense of being read, of the magic turning its pages and finding what it was looking for. Because we're better together than either of us is alone, he said, and the magic apparently agreed. He heard from somewhere to his left Hermione make a small, involuntary sound, not quite a laugh, not quite something else, and he kept his eyes on the reporter, but he was smiling. It was late afternoon when they first tested it deliberately, not planned or not exactly. They'd come back inside to help with a structural problem that was threatening to bring down the East Wing's connecting corridor, a cascade of magical and physical damage that the castle repair teams were struggling with, because the enchantments holding the stones together had been severed in about 14 different places simultaneously, and needed to be reattached in precisely the right order or the whole section would destabilize further. Harry had come to help carry debris. Hermione had come because she could see the pattern, had been able to see it since the morning, that cord with missing notes awareness of the castle's magical structure that the binding had apparently installed as a permanent feature. She stood in the corridor looking at the ceiling with an expression of deep concentration, and then said very quietly, I know how to fix it. The repair team, 2 ministry structural enchanters and a Hogwarts groundskeeper, looked at her with the polite skepticism of professionals being observed by an amateur. Miss, one of the enchanters said not unkindly, this kind of sequential ward reinstatement takes a trained. 7 points of attachment, she said, not paying attention to him. 3 in the ceiling, 2 in the left wall, 2 in the floor. You need to go back in the order they were originally laid, which is floor first, left wall going bottom to top, ceiling from the center outward. She looked at Harry. Can you feel it? He could. It was the same thing she was describing, that awareness of absence of the structure's shape without its foundations. Yes, he paused. The 2 in the floor are almost back in position by themselves. They just need anchoring. Then we start there. The enchanters looked at each other. One of them opened his mouth. The other one, older, grabbed his arm and shook his head very slightly, the look of a man who had reviewed the same facts everyone else had about last night and had drawn his professional conclusions. Harry crouched down, pressed his hand flat to the stone floor and found the ward point the way you find a note in a song, not by analyzing it but by feeling for where it wanted to be. He applied pressure, magical pressure, clean and precise, and the stone settled with a sound like a sigh. Hermione did the other one, standing, pressing the toe of her boot to a spot that looked identical to every other spot and knowing exactly why it was different. Then she raised her wand, her own, reclaimed from Malfoy Manor what felt like a lifetime ago, and began the sequence, and Harry moved to her left and did the counterpoint, and what the 2 enchanters had estimated would take half a day of careful, incremental work took 45 minutes. The corridor stopped trembling. The ceiling settled. The stones found each other again with the satisfied certainty of things returning to their right places. One of the enchanters said quietly, Christ. Language, said the groundskeeper, but he was staring at the ceiling too, where hairline cracks were slowly closing like healing skin. Harry looked at Hermione. She was flushed, not from exertion but from the particular energy of doing something difficult very well, which was one of her most Hermione expressions, and she was looking at the corridor with eyes that were still tracking the magical structure, following the repair as it propagated through the enchantments. It's going to need the North Tower attachment re-established before it'll hold permanently, she said. Tomorrow, he said. Tonight, she said. Hermione, we've been awake for what, 30 hours? The North Tower is connected to the library wards. If it goes further, it'll hold until tonight, he said in the voice that was somehow both calmer and more certain than her very intelligent panic, and she stopped, processed it, accepted it with the grace of someone who recognizes when they're being talked down from a ledge by someone they trust. Tonight then, she said. The older enchanter cleared his throat. Miss Granger, Mr. Potter. If that is to say, would the two of you be interested in looking at the eastern ramparts? Because we've been trying to get a team together for that section since this morning and no one has been able to. Tomorrow, they said simultaneously. The enchanter blinked. Right, of course, obviously. The feast that night, it couldn't really be called a feast. It was more of a gathering, a word that implied people coming together without quite being sure why, happened in the Great Hall, because the Great Hall was where things happened at Hogwarts, and some gravitational pull of tradition operated even in wreckage. The house tables were back in their positions, the worst of the debris cleared, and someone had conjured lights that were softer and more amber than the usual enchanted candles, which was the right instinct. Harry sat at the Gryffindor table with Ron and Ginny and Neville, and what remained of the DA and the Order, and Hermione sat next to him with the codex open beside her plate in the way of someone who eats while reading as a matter of policy. The food was simpler than usual, the kitchens were operational but strained, and the conversation was the fragmented, recursive kind that happens when people are processing something too large to process all at once, cycling back to the same moments from different angles, saying the names of the people who weren't there. Fred kept saying he wished he could have seen you-know-whose face, George said at one point to the table rather than to anyone specifically. His voice was flat, not quite emotionless, but armored, and everyone at that end of the table went quiet. Right up until he thought it was funny, he thought everything was funny. A pause. It's very quiet without him. Has anyone else noticed how quiet it is? No one knew what to say, no one said anything, which was sometimes the right call. Neville, who had been sitting with his arm around Hannah Abbott for most of the evening, said very quietly, "He made us laugh when we needed it most." "That matters." "Yeah," George said. "Yeah, it does." He picked up his fork. "He'd want me to eat. He'd also want me to put something terrible in someone's drink right now. Those things can coexist." Ron made a sound that was half sob and half laugh, and Ginny reached across and gripped his arm, and Harry looked at all of them, these people he'd grown up alongside, battered and present and still here, and felt something in his chest that was too complicated to name and didn't need to be. He felt Hermione's hand find his under the table. Not romantic, or not only, something more structural than that, like a tether, like two people who have learned to anchor each other knowing when to apply the anchor. He turned his palm up and she took the grip and held it, and they sat like that while the conversation flowed around them, and he thought about what she'd said in resonance, and thought that whatever it meant in theoretical magical terms, the experience of it was this: someone who knew what you needed without requiring you to explain it. He'd had that before with her, he'd always had it. The binding, it seemed, had simply made it louder. It was Ginny who brought it up, because Ginny had never had any patience for the subjects that people were carefully not discussing. "So the two of you are sovereigns now," she said, not to the table but to Harry and Hermione specifically, setting down her fork and looking between them with the steady, level gaze of someone who was going to understand this thing and would prefer the real version to the official one. "Yes," Harry said. "And what does that mean? Actually mean, not the official version?" Harry and Hermione exchanged a glance. It lasted less than a second and contained, somehow, an entire deliberation. "It means the magic we've always had doesn't have a ceiling anymore," Hermione said. "And it means we're connected to the underlying structure of all of it. The enchantments, the wards, the deeper magic that everything else runs on." "Connected how?" Ginny asked. "Like how you can feel when a room's temperature changes," Harry said. "Except what we can feel is the magical state of things, damage, imbalance, things that need addressing." Ginny looked at him for a long moment. There was a history between them that sat in the room very quietly, not regret, not exactly, but the gentle melancholy of things that were real and are now something else, transformed rather than erased. He'd always cared about her, he always would. But caring wasn't the same as belonging, and he thought she understood that as clearly as he did now, even if the understanding had an ache in it. "Are you happy?" she asked. It wasn't a small question, and she asked it like she meant the full weight of it. He thought about the clarity, about the 45 minutes in the corridor, about holding Hermione's hand under the table in the ambient warmth of people he loved. "I think I'm going to be," he said. "For the first time in, I think for the first time." She smiled at him, small and real. "Good," she said. "That's good." And then she turned to Neville and asked him something about herbology, because Ginny was very good at recognizing when a moment was complete. He was in the North Tower at midnight. Not because Hermione had pushed for tonight, she'd accepted tomorrow, or at least she'd said she had, but because he'd woken from a 2-hour sleep with the unmistakable awareness of something wrong, the way you wake from a dream about water and realize you're actually thirsty. The North Tower's connection to the library wards was fraying. He could feel it from his bed 3 floors below, a loosening, a thread pulling, and if it went before they stabilized it, the damage would cascade to the archive section of the library and possibly further. He'd dressed, taken his wand and gone, and was 20 feet from the top of the tower stairs when he heard footsteps behind him. Hermione in a dressing gown, her hair down, a book under one arm and an expression of complete unsurprise. "I thought you were sleeping," he said. "I was. And then I felt it." She gestured upward in a way that conveyed the tower's distress without needing words. "You could have woken me. I thought about it." He paused. "I didn't want to disturb you. Harry, if the library wards go, I will personally make your life significantly worse than disturbed." She pushed past him up the stairs. "Come on." He followed, smiling at the back of her head. The top of the North Tower was cold and wide open, the protective glass long since blown out by something or other during the battle, and the wind came in off the mountains with a Scottish autumn indifference to the comfort of people trying to do complex magical repairs. Hermione set the book down on a stone ledge, held it there with a sticking charm that was so reflexive she didn't even say the spell, and started examining the central ward point. Harry came to stand beside her and did the same, felt for the structure the way he'd felt for it in the corridor, and found it worse than expected. The thread wasn't just pulling, it was close to snapping. "Together," he said. "Together," she agreed. The repair took longer than the corridor. The North Tower's enchantments were some of the oldest in the castle, Rowena Ravenclaw's original work, the Codex had noted, which Hermione had relayed to him with the specific excitement she reserved for things that were historically remarkable, and working with them required a different approach, more like conversation than correction. You had to meet them where they were, understand their logic, and offer the reinforcement in the form they recognized. This was, Harry thought, the kind of magic he'd never been taught and had always been capable of. The binding hadn't given him something foreign. It had given him fluency in a language he'd always been hearing. They worked for an hour in near silence, the wind around them, the castle's own ambient magical hum louder up here than anywhere else, and the repair propagated through the enchantments with the slow, satisfying inevitability of a river finding its course. There, Hermione said, when the last connection settled, the tower felt different, sturdier, older in the good way, like a building that remembers what it is. They were both standing with their wands down, close together because the tower was cold and the work had required proximity, and the night above them was enormous, the stars very clear in the way Scottish winter skies sometimes achieved, every star doing its best to be noticed. Harry tilted his head back to look at them and felt the clarity in his bones and the strange, settled rightness of being exactly where he was and nowhere else. "What did you feel?" Hermione asked. She was looking at the sky too, her voice thoughtful rather than interrogative. "During the repair, during all of it, since last night, I keep describing it intellectually and I can't quite." She stopped, frustrated with imprecision in the way she always was. "What does it actually feel like?" He thought about it seriously. "Like I stopped apologizing for existing," he said. She turned to look at him. "I've been my whole life, there's been this sense of taking up too much room, wanting too much, needing too much, being too much of a target or too much of a symbol or too much of a burden, and now that's just," he opened his hand, "gone. I'm here, this is what I am." The magic agrees. He paused. "It's the most uncomplicated I've ever felt." She was quiet for a long moment. "For me it's like being allowed to go full speed," she said. "I've been running at, I don't know, 60%, 70 because going faster meant frightening people, meant being called bossy or insufferable," or she stopped. "And now there's just no governor. I can think as fast as I actually think, and it's terrifying," he offered. "Exhilarating," she corrected. Then, "and terrifying, yes." She looked back at the stars. "We're going to be all right, aren't we?" "Yes," he said, and the tuning fork certainty was in it, and she leaned her shoulder against his in the wind, and for a while they just stood there in the repaired tower with the stars and the old magic and the very large night, and neither of them needed to say anything else. That was when the ghost appeared, not the nearly headless Nick variety, not translucent and hovering. This was different, more like the tower itself was remembering someone, the air thickening, and then resolving into the impression of a figure seated in the empty window frame. A woman in old-fashioned robes, her hair dark and loose, her eyes, even in the ghostly transparency of whatever she was, sharp enough to cut glass. Harry's hand went to his wand before he decided to move. "Put that away," the figure said. Her voice had the quality of something carried by the stone rather than the air. "I'm not a threat, I am barely a presence. I am in truth mostly a memory that this tower has been kind enough to maintain." "Who are you?" Hermione said. Her wand was in her hand but angled down, not pointed, just ready, which was the Hermione Granger version of cautious. "Someone who has been waiting," the figure said. She had an accent that Harry couldn't place, something older than any regional accent he knew, something that suggested the language had been different when she learned it. "Though I confess I stopped expecting you. 1,000 years is a long time to maintain optimism." Harry looked at the woman in the window, at the sharpness of her eyes, the quality of attention in them, at the particular way she was looking at both of them, not with surprise but with something that looked almost like relief. "Rowena," Hermione said, not a question. The ghost of Rowena Ravenclaw inclined her head. "You found the codex quickly, good." Her eyes moved to Harry. "And you repaired the tower correctly, which is more than I could have done at 20. The old wards are particular." She paused. "I have things to tell you, most of it you won't like. I find it's best to begin with that acknowledgement." Tell us, Harry said. She looked at him with those glass-cutting eyes, and something in her expression softened at the edges, not warmly exactly, but with the particular quality of recognition, of someone seeing a person rather than a problem. The previous sovereigns, she began, died not because the binding broke them, they died because they believed they were alone in it. She held his gaze. You are not alone, this is not a minor distinction, this is the entire thing. She paused. But there are other ways to fail, and the Hollow Court has had 1,000 years to learn all of them. The wind moved. More actions. Request aborted. Write the next chapter now. Chapter 3. The Hollow Court moves. The owl arrived at breakfast on the third day. Not an ordinary owl, an enormous black one with white-tipped wings and the bearing of a bird that knew it was carrying something important and had decided to make that clear through sheer physical presence. It landed on the table between Harry and Hermione's plates with an impact that rattled the cutlery, held out its leg with the imperiousness of a creature that had delivered messages to kings, and waited. Harry untied the letter. The envelope was thick cream-colored paper sealed with black wax, the seal pressed into the shape of a tree with its roots showing above the earth as prominently as the branches. No name on the outside. Hermione was reading it before he'd fully unfolded it, leaning across the corner of the table with her chin nearly on his shoulder in the way she did when impatience overrode personal space, which was most of the time. Sovereign named, it began with the capitals as deliberate and pointed as a drawn weapon. You have 3 days to dissolve the binding of your own volition. Ancient magic is not a crown to be worn by children of war, however remarkable. The Custos Antiqui have maintained the balance of magical Britain for 9 centuries. We will not permit a disruption of this magnitude to go unchallenged. This is not a threat. It is a statement of what will occur regardless of your choices. The only variable is how much it costs you. 3 days, no signature. Well, Ron said, reading it upside down from across the table. That's polite. 3 days, Hermione said. She was already in the mode Harry recognized as her working mode, eyes slightly unfocused as her mind engaged with a problem at speed, her hand moving unconsciously toward the pocket where she kept a notebook. They're giving us a deadline because they need time to organize, which means they aren't fully assembled yet. Which means if we move in the next 12 hours we can. Change the terms, Harry said. Exactly, she looked at him. They expect us to spend 3 days being frightened and deliberating. If we're already 3 moves ahead when their window closes, we need to know who we're dealing with first, Harry said. The letter's not signed, but the seal is distinctive. He held it up. Tree with roots above ground, Hermione. She took it, examined it with the focused attention of someone cross-referencing a mental library. The knot family crest, she said after about 4 seconds. Modified, the standard knot crest has the roots below ground. Showing the roots above is a specific variant. It's used by the senior branch. She put it down. Theodore Knott's family, but Theodore's at school, or he was, which means this came from an older generation. How do you know the knot crest? I know most of the sacred 28 crests. I memorized them in 4th year because I thought understanding the power structures of blood politics was important context. She said this without embarrassment. I was right. Harry looked at the owl, which was still sitting on the table, regarding him with magnificent indifference. Go on, he told it. No reply. The owl left, taking with it whatever dignity the table had possessed. Ron was looking at the letter now, having taken it from Hermione. They say Custos Antiqui, but you and Rowena called them the Hollow Court last night. Rowena's name for them, Harry said. She said it's what they became, that they started as genuine guardians of something and turned hollow, still performing the function but emptied of the original purpose. He paused, remembering the ghost's precise, unsentimental delivery of information. She said they're most dangerous because they believe they're right. And are they? Ron asked, not provocatively, genuinely. Harry and Hermione exchanged a glance. In the same way that someone who puts a fence around a forest to protect it and then won't let anyone in or out believes they're right, Hermione said. The protection becomes the point. The thing being protected becomes secondary. She picked up her tea. So yes and no in the specific proportion that makes people most difficult to deal with. Ron nodded slowly. So what do? We find out everything we can about their current leadership structure in the next 6 hours, Harry said. And then we go talk to someone who almost certainly knows more about the Hollow Court than anyone else alive. Who? Harry pushed his chair back. Draco Malfoy. Finding Draco Malfoy turned out to be easier than expected, which itself was a minor warning sign because easy had not historically been the mode of anything involving Draco Malfoy. He was in one of the castle's smaller courtyards, the one off the potions corridor that got afternoon light, but was generally too narrow and too cold to be pleasant enough for anyone to actively seek out. He was sitting on a stone bench with his elbows on his knees, and the specific hunched posture of a person who has found a place to be alone, and is guarding it with body language alone. He looked up when they came around the corner, and his face went through 4 distinct expressions in rapid succession: recognition, wariness, calculation, and then something that settled into a kind of flat, exhausted defiance, as though he'd decided being caught was better than pretending he hadn't been. Potter, he said. Granger, a pause. I assume this isn't social. The letter with the knot seal, Harry said, because Draco Malfoy had never responded well to preamble and Harry had stopped performing social rituals he didn't mean. What do you know about it? Malfoy went very still. Not the calculated stillness of a person playing a hand, the genuine stillness of someone who has heard a thing they hoped not to hear. What letter? The one that arrived this morning, promising dissolution of the binding in 3 days. Harry sat on the opposite bench, which left Malfoy in the mildly uncomfortable position of either standing up to maintain height advantage or staying seated and having a conversation at eye level. He stayed seated. You know about the Hollow Court? I know about a lot of things, Malfoy said. Knowing about things is a Malfoy family trait. He looked at Hermione, then back at Harry, something moving behind his eyes that he was doing his level best to keep off his face. Why are you asking me? Because you're still here, Hermione said. She sat down too, which closed the triangle of the conversation and made it harder to treat as confrontational. You could have left with your parents 2 days ago, your mother left, your father was taken by auras, but you're still here and you're sitting in an empty courtyard alone, which suggests that you either have nowhere to go or you don't want to go where you're going. She met his eyes, level and direct. Which is it? Malfoy looked at her with an expression that Harry recognized. It was the expression you got when Hermione Granger decided to understand something about you and you realized with a sinking sensation that she'd already succeeded. It was the expression of being read. My grandmother, he said finally. He said it like it cost him something. Adelaide, not my mother's mother. He stopped. She's involved with the Hollow Court, Hermione said. She is the Hollow Court, at least the British branch. He stood up because sitting still had apparently become impossible and moved to the courtyard wall, pressing his back against it. She's led it for 40 years. After my grandfather died, she took over and she's very good at it. She's been very good at it for a very long time. He paused. She's also the person who converted my father, not to Voldemort, he came to that himself with plenty of help from people who saw the opportunity, but the philosophy underneath it. The idea that the old families have an obligation to maintain the order of things, that magic belongs to those who understand it properly. He said the last 3 words with the particular sourness of someone quoting a phrase they heard too many times. Where is she now? Harry asked. Malfoy looked at him directly. He had the grey eyes his family was known for, and there was something in them right now that was neither the contempt of the boy Harry had known for 6 years nor the hollow fear of the previous year, something newer, something less performed. That's what I need to tell you, he said. That's why I'm still here. He paused, and the pause had a specific texture to it, the weight of someone about to say something that cannot be unsaid. She's dead. Harry was very still. The Hollow Court killed their own leader. No. Malfoy's jaw tightened. They killed her as a message to me. She was found yesterday morning in Wiltshire at the family home, killing curse. Someone left the Knott family crest burned into the floor next to her. He pressed his fingers against the stone wall like he needed the physical reality of it. They knew I had information about their operations, about their membership, their finances, the specific spells they use for the binding dissolution ritual. His voice was controlled in the way that indicated significant effort. They were telling me to keep quiet. The courtyard was very quiet. And instead, Hermione said gently, you stayed at Hogwarts where there are 2 sovereigns who might be the only people with a reason to use your information. Malfoy looked at her. For a moment he seemed about to say something deflecting, something with the practiced Malfoy surface on it. He didn't. Yes, he said. That's right. Harry looked at him. He thought about all the history between them, the hand offered on a train and rejected, the cruelty of years, the moment on the astronomy tower when everything was different, the moment on the battlefield when Draco had identified him to Voldemort, and the slight hesitation that might have been everything or might have been nothing. He thought about the boy in the courtyard right now, who had just told them his grandmother was murdered as a warning to him, and who was still sitting in Hogwarts instead of running. Tell us what you know, Harry said. It was not forgiveness and it was not friendship, and they all knew it. But it was something real, offered plainly without conditions that Malfoy hadn't earned yet, and Harry watched him process it and accept it with the specific dignity of a person who no longer has the luxury of pride. All right, Malfoy said. He moved back to the bench, sat down, put his wrists on his knees and started talking. He talked for 2 hours. They went inside Hermione's insistence because the cold was becoming a problem for the quality of note-taking and she had developed opinions on optimal conditions for information gathering, and found a classroom 3 corridors away that was empty, the desk still pushed to the walls from whatever pre-battle reorganization had happened. Malfoy talked. Hermione took notes. Harry asked questions that were specific and operational, the kind of questions that suggested he was already building the structure of a response. The Hollow Court had 43 active members across Britain and Ireland. Their inner circle was 7 people. The letter with the Knott seal had been sent by Cassius Warrington, a name Harry vaguely recognized, an older Slytherin who'd been on the Quidditch team years back, who had assumed de facto leadership in Adelaide Knott's absence. He was young for at 35 and he was aggressive in a way that Adelaide had not been. She was patient, Malfoy said. Whatever else you say about her, she understood timing. She would have waited. She would have let you establish yourselves and then dismantled your position from inside through law and politics. He paused. Warrington isn't patient. He sees the binding as an immediate crisis. He'll move fast and hard and he won't care what he breaks. The dissolution ritual, Hermione said, her pen moving. What do you know about it? Enough to know it's dangerous. It was designed 700 years ago by a Custos Antiqui who called himself a scholar and was mostly just very vindictive. It requires a ritual space, specific materials, and he hesitated. 7 participants, and it requires proximity to the sovereigns, not contact but within a certain distance. How close? Harry asked. 50 feet. Malfoy looked at him. So they'll need to get you somewhere contained, somewhere they control. They can't do it from across the country. Harry looked at Hermione. She had already stopped writing and was looking at the notes, her eyes moving in the rapid pattern of someone organizing information into tactical structure. The Wizengamot session, she said. Harry followed her reasoning in the 2 seconds it took to follow it. They'll call an emergency session. Get us to attend as sovereigns, which we've already committed to doing, and the chamber is enclosed. They'll have their 7 people in the gallery or in the robes of Wizengamot members, and when everyone's seated, 50 feet, Harry said. Malfoy was watching them with an expression he didn't quite have the composure to hide, something between fascination and disquiet. You do that often, the finishing each other's sentences thing? Always, Hermione said absently, still looking at her notes. Who are the other 6 Inner Circle members? We know Warrington. Malfoy listed them. She wrote them down. Harry memorized them because he had always been better at faces and names than he was given credit for. The assumption that he wasn't academically sharp had meant people underestimated how much he retained when something mattered to him, and this mattered. One more thing, Malfoy said when the list was done. Something in his voice made Harry look up. The dissolution ritual. If it succeeds, he stopped, looked at his hands. The Codex describes what happens to the sovereigns as unmooring, but that's the old term. My grandmother described it differently. She called it, he paused. She called it burning the anchor while the ship is still attached. He met Harry's eyes. The binding becoming part of you means dissolving it from the outside is. He didn't finish the sentence. Fatal, Harry said. Malfoy didn't answer, which was an answer. The classroom was quiet. Harry sat with this for a moment, not with fear, but with the kind of clear-eyed assessment that had become his native mode since the binding, looking at a threat directly and deciding what it actually was. He was aware of Hermione beside him, the quality of her stillness, which was the stillness of someone whose mind was running very fast and whose face was not showing it. Right, Harry said. Then we need to be the ones who control the Wizengamot meeting, not react to it, control it. They'll move sooner, Malfoy said. Before the meeting, the letter said 3 days, but that's negotiating language. They'll try something in the next 48 hours to soften the ground. What kind of something? Something public, something that establishes a narrative. Malfoy tapped his finger against the desk in the rhythm of someone thinking through a puzzle they've seen before. They'll try to make you look dangerous, uncontrolled. They need public opinion before the Wizengamot session or the legal strategy doesn't hold. So they'll provoke us, Hermione said, or manufacture evidence of a provocation, or both. He paused. My grandmother was very good at setting fires and then offering to help put them out. Warrington isn't subtle enough for that, but he'll have people around him who are. Harry stood up. Then we go to the press again. Today, before they move, we set the narrative first. We did that yesterday, Hermione said. Yesterday was reactive, this is preemptive. He turned to Malfoy. Will you testify in public if it comes to it, about the Inner Circle, about Adelaide, about the dissolution ritual? Malfoy looked at him with an expression that contained several distinct layers of computation, most of which Harry couldn't read and didn't try. Testify to what exactly? A court that half the Hollow Court probably has influence in. To the press, Harry said. A court can be slow-walked and proceduralized. The press just needs one good story. Malfoy was quiet for a long moment. Harry watched him and didn't push, because pushing Draco Malfoy into a corner had never produced anything useful, and he was old enough now to know that the right move with someone making a genuinely costly decision was to give them the space to make it. My name attached to this, Malfoy said slowly, makes me a target for everything that comes after. Not just the Hollow Court. Every family that's been hedging its position for the last 2 days, waiting to see which way this falls. If I go public, I've chosen a side, and the side I've chosen is the right one, Harry said, not unkindly, just precisely. Malfoy looked at him, then at Hermione, then back. You're very confident for someone who's been at this for 3 days. I've been at the underlying problem for 7 years, Harry said. The form's new, the content isn't. A long pause. Malfoy's grey eyes were doing something complicated. Then he said with the tone of someone closing a door they know they won't be able to reopen, fine, but I choose what I say and how I say it. You don't script me. Wouldn't dream of it, Hermione said, and something in the way she said it, not warm but genuinely without condescension, made Malfoy look at her with an expression that was almost surprised. The first attempt came at 7 that evening. They were in the entrance hall, Harry and Hermione and Ron and Neville, who had attached himself with the quiet loyalty of someone who had decided what mattered and was not going to be argued out of it when the enchantment hit. It came through the main doors, which were standing open to the late autumn evening, and it came in a complex layered form that Harry had never seen before, a spiral working, 3 separate spells wound together, designed to look chaotic but operating as a single mechanism. The outer layer was a simple stunner, visible, the kind of thing a Wandray's defender would target. The middle layer was a confundus charm designed to catch whatever defenses were deployed against the first layer. The inner layer was something Harry didn't recognize at all, something that moved like water finding a gap. He deflected all 3 in one motion. Not sequentially, simultaneously. The spell that came out of his wand wasn't something he'd consciously constructed. It was more like the magic reading the incoming working, and generating the appropriate response the way a well-trained ear can hear a wrong note, and it met the three-layer attack and unraveled it precisely, sending all three components spiraling into the stone floor where they dissipated with a sound like breaking glass. Ron hit the ground. Neville had Hermione behind him before she could object to being put behind Neville, and she immediately stepped back out from behind him with the expression of a person who has strong feelings about being treated as someone who needs protection. Four figures stood at the open doors, cloaked, masked, not Death Eater masks, something different, a stylized tree design in silver over black cloth. The hollow court aesthetic, Harry thought, very formal, very planned. That's them, Hermione said quietly. The cloaks are the initiation design, only full members wear them. She had her wand out and was analyzing the spatial positioning with the rapid geometric assessment of someone who was always counting exits and angles. 4 people, which means this isn't the dissolution ritual, they can't do it with 4, this is the provocation. Right, Harry said. He walked forward. Not running, not crouching, not drawing on cover, just walking toward 4 people who had just tried to attack him, which was either the most confident thing anyone had done in the entrance hall of Hogwarts or the most reckless, and the 4 figures in their Silvertree masks seemed briefly unable to process it. Go back, he said. The certainty in the words was like a bell struck. Tell Warrington the 3-day deadline is already expired. Tell him the sovereigns aren't deliberating. Tell him we know about the dissolution ritual, we know about the Wisengamot plan, and we know who the 7 are. He stopped 10 feet from them. And tell him that the next time he sends people to Hogwarts with a spell that complex and a plan that poorly executed, I'm going to start thinking he doesn't take us seriously, and I'd rather he does. The 4 figures stood very still. He's not bluffing, Hermione said from behind him, and the quality of her voice, calm, informational, completely certain, was somehow more chilling than any threat could have been. One of the 4 reached for their wand. Harry flicked his wrist and the wand was in his hand before the figure's fingers had closed on it, summoned from 10 feet away through a mask and a heavy cloak with the casual precision of someone picking up something they'd set down. He looked at it briefly, a good wand, elm and dragon heartstring, and held it at his side. I'll leave it on the front steps, he said. You can collect it when you go. He looked at all 4 of them. Go, they went. Not without the attempt at dignity. There was a quality of stiffened spines in their retreat, but they went quickly and disappeared into the dark of the grounds. Harry set the wand on the front step as promised. He walked back inside and found Ron staring at him with an expression that sat somewhere between impressed and deeply unsettled, and Neville with a similar look, and Hermione was writing something in her notebook. She looked up when he came back. Elm and dragon heartstring, she said, because she'd already clocked it. That's consistent with the Rookwood family, not Augustus Rookwood, he's dead. His nephew Piers, he's on Malfoy's list. She underlined something. That confirms at least one Inner Circle member was in this group. So this wasn't just an intimidation run. They wanted one of us to respond badly and used a real member to make sure the enchantment was powerful enough to generate a reaction. She looked up. They wanted a scene they could take to the press. What are they going to take to the press instead? Neville asked. Harry saying 4 words and 4 people leaving immediately, Ron said. He was looking at Harry with the particular expression he reserved for moments when Harry did something that Ron had recognized was coming before Harry had. That's actually a pretty good story for our side. Better if we write it ourselves, Harry said. They sent a message to the Evening Prophet within the hour, through Hermione, who had a specific relationship with one journalist, not Skeeter, but a younger woman named Josephine Marsh who had been at school with Hermione's mother and had the specific quality of someone who understood that the best journalism served the truth rather than the story. The message was simple, factual, and included the detail of the returned wand that they knew would become the image. 4 individuals in ceremonial regalia affiliated with the Custos Antiqui, a previously dormant organization, attempted an enchantment at Hogwarts Castle this evening. The attempt was neutralized in approximately 4 seconds. No injuries. The sovereigns named are available for comment tomorrow morning. Josephine Marsh published it in the morning edition with a headline that was significantly more restrained than anything Skeeter would have written. This was, Harry thought, exactly the right kind of help. Rowena found them at 2 in the morning, which was becoming, apparently, her preferred operating hour. This time she appeared in the library, which felt appropriate. She was more distinct here, as though the accumulated knowledge of the space gave her more to work with. She sat in one of the reading chairs as though she occupied it, rather than hovering above it, and watched them both with those needle-sharp eyes. They'd been working at the long research table, Hermione cross-referencing everything Malfoy had told them with the codex, and 3 other texts McGonagall had unlocked from the restricted section. Harry going through the list of Wisengamot members and identifying which ones might have hollow court sympathies based on family connections and voting records that Hermione had somehow already organized into a clear chart. The Rookwood nephew, Rowena said without preamble. He was the one with the L. Harry looked at her. You were watching. I'm always watching. I'm a memory in stone. It is what I do. She folded her translucent hands in her lap. You handled it correctly. The restraint was as important as the power. They wanted a conflagration and you gave them a dismissal far more damaging to their narrative. We know, Hermione said, not rudely, but in the way she engaged with any source that was telling her something she'd already determined. What we need is information about the dissolution ritual, specifically whether there are any variants of it that could be deployed remotely. Rowena's expression shifted. A very small shift, but Harry had been watching people's faces his whole life and he caught it. There is one, she said. Tell us. It was developed after my time. I know of it only because the castle retained the memory of the last attempt, 2 centuries ago. A sovereign named had already established significant protections against proximity-based dissolution, so the court of that time commissioned an alternative. She paused, and Harry had the distinct sense she was deciding how much to give them. It requires an artifact, a mirror, not a true vanishing mirror but something similar, a resonance glass, tuned specifically to the binding's magical frequency. She met Harry's eyes. If such a mirror exists and is used in the dissolution ritual, the proximity requirement is removed. They could perform it from anywhere. The library was very quiet. Do they have one? Hermione asked. I don't know. I know that Cassius Warrington's family has historically had the resources and the knowledge. Whether they've had the patience, she shrugged, and the gesture had an odd quality, the motion of someone whose body was memory rather than substance. Adelaide Nott would not have allowed such a thing. She considered the proximity requirement a safeguard. A resonance glass used incorrectly can be catastrophic for the users. How catastrophic? Harry asked. Depending on the sovereign's magical strength at the time of the attempt. Rowena looked at him with that needle-precise gaze. If the binding resists the dissolution strongly enough, the mirror doesn't contain the backlash, it redistributes it, a pause, to everyone within the ritual space. So if we're strong enough, Harry said slowly, and they use the mirror, they destroy themselves, Hermione finished. The ritual backfires through the glass. Yes, Rowena paused. However, this only functions if the binding is stable, fully integrated. The weaker the binding, the less it resists, and the more likely the dissolution succeeds. She let that sit for a moment. How are you sleeping? The question was so sudden and so practical that Harry blinked. Poorly, he said, honestly. That needs to change. The binding integrates through rest, through proximity to each other, through the practice of magic together, through, I know this sounds imprecise and I apologize, through simply being yourselves in the same place. She looked at both of them with the expression of someone delivering medical instructions to impatient patients. The castle helps. Stay in it, work in it. Do not let the ministry move you out of Hogwarts and into a prepared location, whatever justification they offer. Why? Hermione asked. Because there are 47 protective enchantments woven into these walls, most of which were laid by me and several of which were specifically designed for this eventuality. A small, fierce look crossed her translucent face. I was not optimistic that a sovereign binding would happen in my lifetime, but I was prepared for it. Harry looked at her. You designed Hogwarts for this? I designed parts of it, yes. She stood, the motion deliberate and slightly staged in the way of someone who has had 1,000 years to practice presence without physicality. I will tell you the rest tomorrow. Tonight, sleep. Her gaze moved between them with the exasperated patience of someone who has said this before and expects to say it again. Both of you, in your rooms, not this library. I'm not sleeping in the library, Hermione said. You are absolutely thinking about it. A pause. The armchair by the east window is actually quite comfortable, Miss Granger. She closed the codex. Fine. Rowena's ghost began to fade in the way she did, not vanishing but becoming gradually more stone and less person, as though returning to the walls. One more thing, she said from somewhere between air and architecture. Malfoy, keep him close. He's useful, Harry agreed. He's more than useful, the ghost seemed to choose her words with unusual care. He is someone who chose to become different than what he was made. That kind of person is very rare and very valuable in times like these. Do not let him feel discarded when the immediate crisis has passed. A pause. He will expect it. Don't give it to him. Then she was stone again. Harry and Hermione sat in the quiet library for a moment. She's essentially our grandmother now, Ron's voice said from the doorway, and they both turned to find him there, holding a plate with 3 biscuits on it, his hair flattened on one side from sleep, an 800-year-old ghost grandmother who gives life advice and architectural tips. He came in and sat down, offering the plate. I couldn't sleep. Fred used to. Never mind. He took a biscuit. Malfoy's good, by the way. I'm not happy about it, but he is. We know, Harry said. Doesn't mean I have to enjoy it. Absolutely not, Hermione agreed. Ron looked between them. Tomorrow's going to be bad, isn't it? Probably, Harry said. But you two have a plan. Several, Hermione said. Great, Ron said, and ate his biscuit, and they sat together in the library in the small hours of the morning, 3 people who had walked into hell together and come out the other side, not quite the same shape as before, but still, importantly, themselves. The Daily Prophet the following morning ran Josephine Marsh's story on page 1 and Rita Skeeter's counter-narrative, The Sovereigns, Power Grab or Genuine Calling, Ministry Insiders Speak, on page 3, which was a victory of placement if nothing else. The story that took page 2, however, was the one that changed everything. An OTT family matriarch found dead in Wiltshire home. CUSDOSANTIQI symbol burned into floor. Harry read it over breakfast and felt several things simultaneously. The grim satisfaction of a narrative arriving before the opposition could control it. The discomfort of Adelaide Nott's death being public before he and Hermione had decided how to use it. and the very clear recognition that someone had leaked the story to the press before they had. He looked at Malfoy, who was eating at the end of the Slytherin table alone. There were still Slytherin students at Hogwarts, those who had stayed for various reasons, and none of them were sitting near Draco, which said something about the specific social consequences of his choices. "Did you send it?" Harry asked, appearing beside him with a directness that made two Slytherin second years at the far end of the table edge away slightly. Malfoy looked at him. "Yes," he said, "without telling us. I sent it last night before we talked." He met Harry's eyes without apology. "She was my grandmother. I wanted that story told by someone with the right to tell it before the court decided how to frame her death." A pause. "I should have told you after I didn't, which was a misstep." He said the last sentence like it actually cost him. "It won't happen again." Harry looked at him for a moment, then he sat down. "It helped, actually. But we need to know when you move independently." "Understood." Malfoy looked at the paper. "Warrington will be furious. He'll know it came from me." "Good," Harry said. "Then the next thing he does angry." Malfoy looked at him sideways. "You're using his anger as a strategy." "I'm using his anger as a clock," Harry said. "He'll move fast when he's angry. We need him to move before he's ready." He picked up a piece of toast from Malfoy's plate without asking, which surprised Malfoy into a startled look. "Ready to go on record today?" A pause. Then Malfoy straightened, and something in him seemed to make a decision that he'd been circling for days. "Yes," he said. "Let's go do that." Harry stood, and for a moment he and Draco Malfoy looked at each other across 6 years of history. And it wasn't resolved. None of it was resolved. It was far too recent and far too complicated for resolution. But it was set aside cleanly and deliberately by two people who had decided that what was in front of them mattered more than what was behind them. "Come on then," Harry said, and they went. Chapter 4. The Archive. Hermione found the door on a Wednesday. She'd been looking for it since Rowena's comment about the North Tower. "I was prepared for it," which had lodged in her mind with the particular insistence of a sentence that contains more than it's saying. She'd been patient about it, which had cost her, because patience was not her natural mode when she knew something was there to be found. She'd spent Tuesday doing everything else first. The press interview with Josephine Marsh that ran alongside Malfoy's statement, 2 hours helping McGonagall with the structural repairs to the 4th-floor corridor, a meeting with Kingsley that had been productive in the specific way of meetings where both sides are paying attention. She'd done all of it and done it well and thought about the door the entire time. It was behind a tapestry on the 3rd floor, which should have been obvious in retrospect. Hogwarts hid its most important things behind tapestries with the consistency of a person who has found one good hiding spot and refuses to innovate. The tapestry itself depicted a woman in Ravenclaw blue standing in a library, her back to the viewer, looking at shelves that extended beyond the frame. Hermione had walked past it 100 times in 6 years and noticed it, the way you notice something peripheral that your brain categorizes and files, and had never stopped to look closely. She stopped now. The woman in the tapestry had her hair down. Rowena's ghost had her hair down. Hermione put her hand flat on the tapestry and pushed. The door was behind it, small and arched and made of dark wood that was older than anything else in this part of the castle, the grain of it running in a spiral pattern that was either natural or deliberate, and was probably deliberate. There was no handle, no keyhole, just the wood and the sense of something behind it that was not quite pressure but was adjacent to pressure, the sense that the door was aware of her hand on it and was making a decision. She waited. She was good at waiting when she understood the mechanism. The door opened. The stairs beyond went down, significantly down, further than the castle's geography should have allowed, which meant either the space below was enchanted or Rowena had done something to the castle's structural logic in this section, and probably both. The light that came up from below was warm and amber and entirely sourceless, which was consistent with everything Hermione had read about Rowena Ravenclaw's documented approach to architectural enchantment. Functional beauty, nothing wasted, nothing purely decorative that wasn't also doing 3 other things. She went down. Room at the bottom was large in the way that spaces are when they've been arranged to feel larger than they are. The ceiling arched. The shelves ran in concentric curves rather than straight lines, and the amber light came from crystals set into the spaces between the books rather than from candles or torches. It smelled of old paper and something floral and metallic simultaneously, the specific smell of a very old magical space that has been maintaining itself without human intervention. The shelves were full. Not haphazardly full, arranged with a logic that Hermione recognized immediately as the logic of a very organized mind, which was the most comforting possible thing to encounter in an unexpected room. Chronological in the broad sense, categorized within that indexed, she found the index in the first minute, a small leather book on a reading stand near the entrance that listed everything in the archive with a precision that made her feel a profound retrospective kinship with the woman who'd compiled it. She sat down at the single reading table, opened the index and began. She sent a patronus to Harry 45 minutes later. It found him in the courtyard where he'd been running what could only be described as an impromptu training session with Neville and 3 other DA members who decided that the current moment was an excellent time to work on their defensive casting. The otter delivered the message in her voice. Found something. 3rd floor behind the tapestry of the woman in the library. Come when you can. Bring the codex and whatever food you have. He came in 20 minutes, which was faster than when you can implied but was very Harry. He came down the stairs and stopped at the bottom and looked at the room with an expression that was, for a moment, simply wonder, the unguarded response of someone who has found something beautiful before his more strategic mind caught up. She built it for us, he said. She built it for whoever the sovereigns turned out to be, Hermione said. But yes, effectively. He came to the table and set down a wrapped bundle that turned out to contain sandwiches and 2 apples, because Harry Potter in a crisis was reliably logistical, and dropped into the chair across from her. He picked up the index without asking, which she didn't mind, because his instinct for what was relevant was quick and usually accurate. How long have you been here? About an hour. What have you found? She'd been building to this, arranging the sequence in which to tell him, because the information had a shape to it that would matter more if received in the right order. Start with this, she said, and slid a book across the table. It was slim, bound in something that wasn't quite leather, and the cover bore 2 overlapping circles in faded gold ink. The 7 bindings, a complete history. Not the Codex's version, older, more detailed, written by Rowena herself in a hand that was so precise and small it looked like print. Harry opened it. She watched his eyes move across the first page. Then he turned pages, reading quickly in the way he did when something had caught him, not skimming but absorbing, the kind of reading that went in and stayed. After 5 minutes he looked up. They all died within 3 years, he said. Except Elara of the Western Reaches, Hermione said. Who lasted 23 years and is the one Rowena considered the successful case. She paused. Read the section about her first, then the others. He found it. She watched him read. She'd already gone through it twice, and both times it had landed somewhere very specific in her chest, not fear exactly, but the feeling you get when you understand a pattern clearly enough to see where you fit in it, and the fitting is not comfortable. Elara of the Western Reaches had been sovereign named in the 11th century, the only single person binding before the current one that had lasted more than a decade. She'd restructured the magical governance of the Western Isles, established the first cooperative between wizarding and non-wizarding communities, and died of old age at 73. By any measure, she was the proof of concept, the one that worked. What Rowena's account made clear, and what the Codex had not, was why she'd survived when the others hadn't. Elara had understood that the binding was not a power she wielded. It was a relationship she was in, and like any relationship, it required maintenance, investment, and above all, honesty. The sovereigns who'd failed had treated the binding as a tool, had drawn on its power without returning anything to it, had used the clarity it gave them to pursue their own ends without regularly examining whether those ends were still aligned with the magic's original purpose. The binding had given them everything they'd asked for, and they'd given it nothing back, and eventually the relationship had simply failed, and the failure at that depth was catastrophic. The binding wanted not just power but purpose. Not just strength but service, and the sovereign who failed to understand this, who took the crown and forgot it was also a burden, found themselves drifting slightly incrementally until the drift was too far to correct. The binding is not yours, Rowena had written, you are its. There is a significant difference, and every sovereign who forgot it paid accordingly. Harry set the book down. He had a particular expression that she'd learned to read over 7 years, the expression of someone who had understood something important and was now sitting with the full weight of it rather than rushing past. It's not about power, he said. No, she agreed. Or not primarily. The power is a consequence of what it actually is. What does it actually want from us? I think, she stopped, because this was the part she'd been turning over for the last hour and hadn't fully resolved. I think it wants us to stay honest about why we're doing things. I think the moment we start using what it gives us purely for our own purposes or for fear or for any reason that isn't genuinely aligned with the care of magic itself, she paused, it starts to erode. And then it collapses, Harry said, and then it collapses. She met his eyes. Which means the most dangerous thing isn't the hollow court, it's us, our own reasoning, our own rationalizations. He was quiet for a moment, then he said, good, I'd rather the biggest threat be something we can actually control. She looked at him. That's an extremely Harry Potter way to respond to that information. Is it wrong? She considered it. No, she said, it's actually the correct response. I just needed a moment to catch up to it. He almost smiled. There's more, isn't there? It wasn't a question because he'd been watching her face. She nodded and slid a second book across the table. The second book was harder. It was a journal, not Rowena's, but belonging to the 5th sovereign named, a man called Aldous Penn, who had been bound in the 16th century and had lasted 19 months before he was killed by what the record called a severance working, deployed by a predecessor organization to the Hollow Court. His journal was preserved in the archive with the specific care of a cautionary document. The first half was remarkable in the way all sovereign records were remarkable, the accelerating clarity, the deepening connection to the underlying magic of Britain, the specific joy of doing something that felt exactly right. Penn had been a scholar, not a fighter, and his descriptions of the binding's nature were the most articulate in the archive. He wrote about it the way Hermione thought about it, as a relationship with something vast and patient and genuinely interested in human beings in the way that the ocean is interested in the ships that cross it. The second half was different. Penn had been alone in his binding single person like all the others, and in the 17th month he had begun to fail in a specific way that Rowena, annotating the journal in the margins, had identified and named the drift. He'd started using the binding's power in ways that were just slightly self-serving, not dramatically, not obviously, but the incremental accumulation of small misalignments had produced a detectable drift in the connection, and Penn had noticed it and become afraid, and the fear had accelerated the drift, and he'd written the last entry 4 days before he died. I can feel it pulling away from me, not withdrawn hurt. I don't know how to repair this. I should have it ended there. Rowena's marginal note at the bottom. He might have survived if he'd been willing to ask for help. The pride of the solitary sovereign is its own dissolution. Hermione turned the final page and found Rowena's concluding annotation, written in the same precise hand but with an unusual quality of, she could only call it grief, the writing slightly less controlled, the ink slightly heavier. This is why too, the resonance pair corrects for each other. When one drifts, the other feels it. When one falls into pride or fear or small dishonesty, the other is there not to judge but to notice. This is why the ancient magic has never named two simultaneously before now. The conditions must be specific enough to be almost impossible, but when they are met, the stability increases by an order of magnitude. The paired binding is not twice as strong, it is 10 times as resilient. I built this archive for them. I do not know who they will be or when they will come. I built it anyway because hope without infrastructure is just optimism, and optimism is not enough. Hermione had read those last 2 sentences 4 times in the past hour. Each time they'd done something different to her. She watched Harry read them now. He read them twice, looked up. She built us a library, he said, and there was something in his voice that was very careful, very contained. She built us a library, Hermione agreed. They sat with it for a moment, the enormity of that, of a woman who had been dead for 800 years doing something so specifically generous, so forward-aimed, so useful. Hermione thought about Rowena as she appeared in the tower and the library, sharp and unhurried and impossibly present, and thought that the woman who wrote those annotations was exactly the woman she encountered in those conversations, and that this consistency across 8 centuries was perhaps the most remarkable thing she'd found here. What else? Harry asked. She slid the 3rd book across. He looked at the cover, looked at her. How bad? It's not bad, she said. It's complicated. She paused. Read the section marked with the blue ribbon. He opened it, found the ribbon. Read. She watched him, watched his eyes move, stop, move again, watched his face do the thing it did when he was processing something that required more than one pass. After 10 minutes, he set it down carefully. He didn't speak immediately. The binding can't be dissolved from the outside, he said slowly. Not permanently, not really. No, she agreed. The dissolution ritual can temporarily disrupt it, for days or weeks if done perfectly, but without the sovereigns actively choosing to release it, it reforms. He looked at the book. Warrington doesn't know this. Almost certainly not. The Hollow Court's texts are copies, and from the archive's catalogue the copies are missing several sections, including this one. She folded her hands on the table because she needed the physical grounding for the next part, which means the dissolution ritual is a weapon they're deploying under a fundamental misunderstanding of how it works. They believe it's permanent. It isn't. She met his eyes, which means the real danger isn't the ritual. The real danger is something else. What? She took a breath. If the binding can only be permanently dissolved by the sovereigns choosing to release it, then what Warrington actually needs isn't to perform the ritual. He needs to make us want to let it go. She let that sit. He needs to give us a reason to choose dissolution ourselves. The amber light of the archive held the silence. Fear, Harry said, or grief, or exhaustion, Hermione said, or guilt, or the belief that we're doing more harm than good. She paused. The drift Penn experienced, it's not just about personal dishonesty. It can be accelerated from the outside. If someone can create the conditions under which the sovereigns begin to doubt the fundamental rightness of the binding, the drift happens faster, and then we might release it ourselves without being forced. Yes, she looked at him directly, which means the Wisengamot hearing isn't just a legal challenge, it's a psychological one. Warrington wants us in that chamber not primarily to perform the ritual. He wants us in that chamber surrounded by 100 people telling us we're dangerous, we're a threat, we're destroying the foundations of wizarding society, because if he can make us believe it, he doesn't need the ritual at all. Harry was quiet for a moment. Then that's actually very smart. I know, she said. I'm disturbed by it too. He looked at her, she looked at him. And then because they were who they were both quietly assessing the same thing from different angles, which was what in resonance meant in practice. 2 minds meeting the same problem and producing a result neither would have reached alone. So we need to be very sure, Harry said slowly, before we walk into that chamber about what we believe about this, about ourselves, about why we're doing it. He paused. Not the political version, the real version. Yes, she said. Which is why I need to ask you something. She looked at her hands for a moment, then back at him. And I need you to answer honestly, not strategically. All right. Do you want this? The binding, the sovereign named, all of it. She kept her voice level and her eyes on his. Not because the magic chose you, not because it's the right thing or the responsible thing or the thing that saves the most people, but genuinely, personally, for yourself. Do you want it? He was quiet for long enough that she felt the silence as a physical thing. I want the version of it where I'm actually useful instead of just used, he said finally. He stopped, started again. My whole life, the things that were asked of me were things I did because they had to be done, not because I chose them. And I'd do them again, all of them, because they needed doing. But this is the first time something has happened to me that I would. He paused, and she could see him being careful with the honesty, which was the most honest possible sign. I would choose it. If I was given the choice right now, knowing everything, I would choose it. She exhaled. What? He said. Nothing. I just needed to hear it said properly. She looked away, out at the amberlit shelves, and then back. I want it too, she said. I want it badly enough that it frightens me a little, which is why I needed to ask you, because I trust myself less when I want something this much. Harry looked at her with an expression that was very still and very warm and very much the expression of someone who understood exactly what she'd just said, because they'd spent years being afraid of wanting things. Hermione, he said. You're the most trustworthy person I've ever met, and you are at your most trustworthy when you want something badly enough to be afraid of it. She processed this. She paused. That's actually quite good. I have moments. You have more moments than you give yourself credit for. She picked up her notebook. Now, we need to talk about the drift, and what it means for us specifically, because I think there's something in the archive that suggests a prevention mechanism, and I want your thoughts on it before I draw conclusions. Show me. She was already moving to the shelves, running her fingers along the spines with the focused attention of a person who has already memorized most of the index and is simply confirming location. The drift in the paired binding is self-correcting, according to Rowena's notes, because the resonance between the two sovereigns acts as a calibration mechanism. But it only works if, she pulled a thin volume from between two larger ones, if the pair is genuinely honest with each other, not just tactically honest, fundamentally. She turned to find him standing 2 feet behind her, which she'd half expected. He'd followed her to the shelf without any apparent reason beyond the fact that the conversation was happening in that direction. If one of us is hiding something from the other, the resonance degrades, slightly at first, then more. It's essentially, she opened the book. Rowena compares it to 2 tuning forks. If they're both true, they amplify each other. If one is damaged, the note's wrong, Harry said. And you can hear it. Exactly. She showed him the page. He read it, standing next to her, and she was aware of the proximity in the same way she'd been increasingly aware of it since the binding, not uncomfortably, but precisely, as though her spatial awareness had been recalibrated to include him as a reference point. So we can't afford not hidden feelings, not managed truths, not things we're waiting for the right time to say. She looked up. Whatever it is, we just say it. Agreed, he said. Then, after a pause, in the tone of someone being scrupulously honest, I'm aware that we've been dancing around something since the courtyard, both of us. She held his gaze. I'm aware of that too. I don't think now is. No, she agreed. Not now, but soon, because she tapped the book. Drift. Soon, he agreed. And the word had a quality to it that was not quite a promise and not quite a question and was somehow more solid than either. She put the book on the table with the others, ready to hear the part about the resonance glass. Is it worse than everything else? It's more specific than worse. She sat back down. Rowena has an entry in the master journal about it. She calls it the one tool that could genuinely threaten a paired binding under the right conditions, which means it's also the one thing we need to neutralize before the Wisengamot session. Warrington might not have it, Harry said. He might not. But we have to assume he does. She opened the master journal to the marked page. The resonance glass, if it exists and is tuned correctly, can interfere with the calibration between the two sovereigns even at a distance. It doesn't dissolve the binding, it introduces noise, static, the magical equivalent of 2 tuning forks that can suddenly no longer hear each other clearly. She looked up, which creates the conditions for drift. So the glass isn't the weapon. It's the setup for the real weapon, which is us, she said. Our own doubt. If the resonance is disrupted long enough. She paused. The way to defeat it is counterintuitive. You'd expect the answer to be some kind of magical countermeasure, a ward against the glass's frequency, but it's not, Harry said. He'd already followed it. She could see it in his face, that clean, quick intelligence that operated through instinct where hers operated through process, and which arrived at the same places by a more direct route. The way to defeat the resonance glass, she said, is to make the resonance so strong that the noise can't compete. She paused. You strengthen the connection between the sovereigns to the point where external interference is simply irrelevant, Harry said. He was quiet for a moment. And how exactly does one do that? She looked at the book. The passage was very clear. Rowena's handwriting was very precise. Time, she said, keeping her voice entirely clinical. Proximity, shared purpose, and she turned the page. What Rowena calls the full acknowledgement of the resonance itself, which she describes as. She stopped. What does she describe it as? Harry said. She's remarkably specific. Hermione's voice remained even with some effort. She describes it as the moment the sovereign pair stops treating the connection between them as incidental and names it as foundational, as the center of what they are rather than a useful feature of it. She looked up. In practice, in the historical cases where it was tested, this meant, just say what she says. Hermione looked at him. He looked at her. She placed the book flat on the table between them so they could both read the passage. The resonance is merely potential until named. Two tuning forks in proximity will vibrate sympathetically but without direction. It is the active intention of one tuning fork deliberately choosing to align with the other, not by accident of proximity but by choice, that transforms sympathy into foundation. The sovereign pair must choose each other, not as allies, not as partners in function, but as the primary fact of their magical existence. When this choice is made consciously and honestly, no glass in the world can introduce sufficient interference to separate them. The archive was very quiet. Right, Harry said after a moment. Yes, Hermione agreed. So, he said carefully, when you said soon, I didn't mean immediately. I know, I just meant before the Wisengamot session. She straightened, squaring her shoulders in the particular way she did when she was pulling herself back into operational mode from a more personal register. We have approximately 4 days. That's enough time. Harry looked at her with an expression that was warm and exasperated, and very fond in a way he no longer seemed particularly interested in hiding, since they'd both just read a passage from an 800-year-old text essentially explaining why hiding it was counterproductive. Only you, he said, would schedule that. I'm not scheduling it, she said with dignity. I'm noting its relevance to the timeline. Those are the same thing. They are not, he laughed, a real one, the kind she heard rarely, the kind that was entirely unguarded, and it broke through the careful architecture of the conversation like sunlight through curtains, and she found herself smiling before she decided to. 4 days, she said firmly. 4 days, he agreed, still smiling. She began organizing the books into the order she needed for the research brief she was already building: the strategic overview for Kingsley, the tactical document for the Wisengamot session, the countermeasures for the resonance glass, and he pulled a chair around to her side of the table rather than sitting across from it, which he'd been doing since the binding with the easy comfort of someone who has stopped needing a reason. They worked for 3 more hours in the amber light of Rowena's archive, and outside the castle the autumn dark settled over the mountains, and somewhere in London Cassius, Warrington was making plans that would culminate in a Wisengamot session he believed he controlled, and the 2 people he was planning to destroy were sitting in a room built for exactly this moment, getting ready. They came back up from the archive at 11 that night, and found Draco Malfoy sitting on the floor outside the tapestry with his back against the wall and his arms on his knees, and the expression of someone who has been waiting a while and is too proud to show it. How long have you been here? Hermione asked. Not long, Malfoy said, which means long. He stood up, brushing off his robes with the automatic dignity of a Malfoy in a socially awkward situation. I found something. About the resonance glass. Harry and Hermione went still simultaneously. Malfoy clocked this immediately. You already know about the glass. Just learned, Harry said. What do you know? My family has won. He said it with the specific flatness of someone delivering information they knew would land hard. Had present tense is complicated. He paused. My grandmother commissioned it 40 years ago. I found reference to it in her correspondence. My father sent me a box of her papers before the auras got to Wiltshire. I don't think he read them. Another pause. Warrington knows about it. He's the one who convinced her to commission it in the first place back when he was 20-something and making himself useful to her. He looked at Harry. He'll have it, or he'll have someone get it from the family vault. My father's been arrested, so the wards will be down by now. Can the glass be destroyed? Hermione asked. Rowena says yes, Harry said. I need to find the method. Already found it. She had while he'd been handling the not letter that morning. It's fragile to a specific kind of counter-resonance. If the sovereigns generate the correct frequency together, the glass shatters, but it has to be within a physical distance, about 20 feet. So we need to get to it before the session, Harry said, or have it brought to us. Malfoy was quiet for a moment. I might be able to get into the vault. My father gave me secondary access when I was 16. Those wards might still recognize me. He said might twice in the same breath, which from Malfoy was essentially the equivalent of anyone else saying probably not and trying anyway. There's something else in the vault that's relevant too. My grandmother kept records. 40 years of Hollow Court membership, meeting records, correspondence, everything. He met Harry's eyes. If that gets to the right people before the Wisengamot session, it ends the legal challenge before it starts, Hermione said. The members who are also Wisengamot members are compromised. They recuse, the challenge loses its foundation, and Warrington has nothing left but the ritual, Harry finished, which we now know doesn't work permanently and can be turned back on them through the glass. Malfoy looked between them. You two have been very productive this evening. We had a good library, Hermione said. Right. He was quiet for a moment. If I do this, the vault, the records, the glass, I'm burning every remaining connection to my family's world. Anyone who's been hedging will know exactly where I stand. He said it without drama, not fishing for reassurance, just stating it plainly, the way you state the cost of something before agreeing to pay it. Harry looked at him and thought about what Rowena had said. He chose to become different than what he was made. I know, Harry said. We're not going to tell you it doesn't matter. It does. He paused. We're also not going to tell you we can protect you from every consequence. We can't. He held Malfoy's gaze. But you won't be alone in it. That part we can guarantee. Malfoy held his gaze for a long moment. Something passed through his expression that Harry didn't try to name. Generous of you, Malfoy said, which was Malfoy for thank you, and they all understood it as such. The vault, Hermione said efficiently. When can you go? Tomorrow morning. He paused. I'll need someone with me. The wards will let me in, but extracting the records and the glass without the right containment. I'll come, she said immediately. Both Harry and Malfoy looked at her. You can't use standard containment spells on a resonance glass, she explained patiently to Harry specifically. The glass is frequency sensitive. The wrong containment spell could activate it inadvertently. She looked at Malfoy. I know the correct method, do you? A pause. No, Malfoy admitted. Then I come, she said. Harry, you stay here. Hermione, you're more visible than I am. If Warrington has surveillance on the vault and sees you walking in, he'll move immediately. He doesn't consider me the primary threat, which is his error and our advantage. She looked at him steadily. I'll have Malfoy and I'll have every relevant knowledge base and I'll be back before noon. Harry looked at her. He didn't like it, she could see that, but he was also applying the same operational logic she was, and the operational logic was clear. Take this, he said, and handed her something from his pocket. The invisibility cloak folded down to a small square. Both of you use it going in, single file, Malfoy in front. Malfoy looked at the cloak. That's the Potter. Yes, Harry said. A pause. Right. Malfoy pocketed it with the careful handling of someone who understood what they were holding. Harry looked at Hermione. The look lasted about 2 seconds and said most of what it needed to. Before noon, he said. Before noon, she agreed. Stop worrying. I'll stop worrying when the glass is in 17 pieces. 16, she said. Rowena says 16. It's a specific. Hermione. Right. Good night, Harry. Be careful. She was already walking away down the corridor. Malfoy stepped behind her, both of them moving with the focused energy of people who have a plan and a timeline and prefer it that way. She looked back once. He was still watching. She turned back, smiling at the floor, and walked toward tomorrow. Chapter 5. The Reckoning. The Malfoy Vault was in Wiltshire, underneath a house that the Aurors had cordoned off but not yet fully secured, which was the specific administrative lag of a law enforcement body dealing with approximately 40 concurrent Death Eater asset freezes simultaneously. Hermione had read the Ministry's internal timetable. Kingsley had given them access, as agreed, and knew they had a window of roughly 6 hours before the official containment team arrived. They apparated to the edge of the estate at 6 in the morning. The house was enormous and cold in the early light, the kind of building that communicated wealth primarily through the suggestion that comfort had never been the point. The grounds were immaculate in the way that things are when they're maintained by enchantment rather than care, too perfect, no wildness, every hedge at the same angle. Hermione had grown up in a house with a garden that her father tended himself with mud on his knees and strong opinions about roses, and she had always understood instinctively the difference between a garden and a display. Malfoy didn't look at the house. He looked at the ground slightly ahead of him, which was the look of someone navigating by internal geography. The vault entrance is through the east garden, he said, his voice flat and operational. There's a rose arbor at the far end. The entrance is under the third arch. Wards, she asked. Family recognition ward on the outer boundary. It already let us through or we wouldn't have been able to apparate this close. He paused. There's a general security ward on the vault door itself and whatever my grandmother added. He looked at her sideways. She was not a standard practitioner. I noticed the complexity of the letter. She taught herself 17 archaic curse systems, Malfoy said, with the tone of someone quoting a family fact that had always been presented as pride and was now presenting as threat. For academic purposes, she always said. He said academic purposes with enough precise irony that Hermione almost smiled. They moved under the invisibility cloak, single file as Harry had specified, Malfoy in front because he knew the path and hesitation under cloak in unfamiliar territory was how you tripped. The east garden was indeed immaculate, the roses in their November dormancy trimmed to perfect uniformity, and the arbor at the end was stone-columned and old, much older than the house. This predates the current building, Hermione said quietly. By about 400 years, Malfoy said. The Knott family built the original structure here. The Malfoys acquired it and built over everything except this. He reached the third arch, felt along the stone in a specific pattern left side, 3 points at equal intervals, then the keystone and the stone shifted. The vault stairs went down. The Malfoy vault was not what Hermione expected, and she adjusted her expectations quickly because the Malfoy family had a talent for being other than expected when the audience assumed they understood them. She'd expected ostentatious wealth, the kind of display that substituted volume for judgment. What she found was orderly, shelved, documented, the kind of organization that suggests whoever arranged it cared about being able to find things, not just about owning them. Along one wall, floor to ceiling, documents, organized chronologically by decade, each section labeled in the same precise hand she recognized from the correspondence Malfoy had mentioned. Adelaide Knott's records. 40 years, Hermione said quietly, looking at the span of it. She was very thorough, Malfoy said, and this time there was no irony in it at all, just a kind of complicated grief that he didn't try to manage. He turned to the opposite wall where a locked cabinet stood separate from everything else. The glass is in here. Hermione turned. The cabinet was warded. She could feel it without touching it, a specific vibration in the air around it, the magical equivalent of a sound just below hearing. Move back, she said, 12 feet. He moved. She approached the cabinet carefully, feeling out the ward's structure the way she'd learned to feel out the castle's enchantments, not forcing but listening. The ward was 3-layered, which she'd expected from what Malfoy had said about Adelaide's capabilities, but the layering was designed for general intrusion prevention, not for sovereign-level magical sensitivity. She could see the logic of it, the gaps in it, the places where the 3 layers didn't quite interface cleanly. She went through the gaps. 20 seconds. The cabinet opened. Inside, on a velvet shelf, was the resonance glass. It was smaller than she'd expected, the size of a hand mirror, the frame ornate in silver, the glass itself with a quality she'd never seen before, not reflective and not transparent, but something between, with a depth to it that the physical dimensions didn't account for. She stood looking at it for a moment, not touching it. It wasn't humming exactly, but it had a frequency. She could feel it as a faint, specific pressure in the part of her chest where the binding lived. It's already tuned, she said. To you and Potter? Malfoy asked from his 12 feet away. To the binding's frequency, yes, she looked at him. Which means someone has been observing the binding closely enough to tune this. That requires proximity, sustained proximity over at least, she calculated, 3 days minimum. There's been someone in Hogsmeade since the day after the final battle, Malfoy said. I noticed someone watching the castle grounds but assumed it was press. Warrington's people? She looked back at the glass. He's been preparing this longer than the letter implied. He wasn't waiting to see what we do, he was already moving. Which means the 3-day deadline was a distraction, she said. Something to make us feel like we had time. She reached into her bag and took out the containment case she'd prepared that morning, a specifically lined box, the lining a non-resonant material that Rowena's archive had specified. She picked up the glass with both hands very carefully and placed it in the box. The moment the lid closed, the faint pressure in her chest eased. Right, she said, the documents. They worked for the next 2 hours. Hermione was systematic in a way that made Malfoy stop and look at her twice, not because systematic was surprising, but because the speed of her systematization was. She identified the most relevant documents, membership records, correspondence that directly implicated Wizengamot members, the ritual specifications that confirmed what was already in Rowena's archive, and one folder that contained something she hadn't expected, a complete financial record of the Hollow Court's assets over 40 years, including the specific funding streams that connected them to 6 current ministry departments. She photographed everything with a copying charm, organized the originals into the order in which they'd be most useful to Kingsley's legal team, and was back under the cloak with Malfoy at the vault entrance by 9:15. They were above ground, back in the grey Wiltshire morning before either of them spoke. She kept everything, Malfoy said, not about the vault, about Adelaide, about the 40 years of meticulous records. She believed what she was doing was right, Hermione said. It wasn't absolution and wasn't condemnation. People who believe they're right keep records, it's people who know they're wrong who burn them. Malfoy was quiet for a moment. Is that supposed to be comforting? No, it's supposed to be accurate. He looked at her sideways. You're very strange, Granger. I know. She held the containment case. She loved you, you know, it's in the letters. She worried about you throughout last year. He looked at the ground. She also would have let Warrington kill us both if it meant preserving what she believed in. Yes, Hermione said simply. Both things can be true. Both things are true. She held his gaze for a moment. That's what makes grief complicated rather than clean. He didn't say anything, but something in his posture shifted very slightly, the way something shifts when it's been held at a particular tension for too long and someone has finally offered it permission to ease. They apparated back to Hogwarts at 9:40. Harry was in the entrance hall when they arrived, not pacing, standing, the specific still way he stood when he was waiting for something and was managing the waiting through sheer will. He looked at Hermione first, a quick full-length assessment that was entirely involuntary, and then at the containment case in her hands. You have it, he said. We have it, and the records. She held up the case. The glass was pre-tuned. Warrington has been observing us since the beginning. Harry's expression did something brief and sharp. How long until the Wizengamot session? Kingsley sent word this morning, he said. The session's been called for tomorrow. Emergency summons, 48 hours notice, waived under wartime emergency provisions. He paused. Someone pushed it forward. Warrington, Malfoy said. He knows I took the papers. He'll have had surveillance on the vault. He pulled the invisibility cloak from his pocket and handed it back to Harry, who took it with the practiced ease of someone receiving an old friend. He's accelerating. Good, Harry said. Malfoy looked at him. That's the second time you've called a hostile escalation good. Means he's reacting to us instead of us reacting to him. Harry took the containment case from Hermione, looked at it, handed it back. We destroy the glass today. Tonight we brief Kingsley with everything. Tomorrow we go to the Wizengamot. He looked at both of them. Anything I'm missing? The resonance glass destruction requires both of us, Hermione said, and it can't be done inside the castle. The counter-resonance will interact with the structural enchantments. Outside then, this afternoon. There's one more thing, Malfoy said. He pulled a single envelope from his inner pocket, separate from everything else they'd brought from the vault, clearly set aside. This was addressed to me. Personal correspondence not filed with the rest. He held it out. I haven't opened it. Harry looked at it. Hermione looked at it. The not crest on the seal, but the variant, the older one, the one Adelaide herself used rather than the Hollow Court's official mark. Open it, Harry said. Malfoy broke the seal. Read it. His face did several things that he controlled with varying success, and then he handed it to Hermione without a word. She read it, passed it to Harry. It was dated 2 weeks before Adelaide's death, before the final battle, before any of them had known how things would turn out. Draco, if you are reading this, things have gone badly in the way I feared they might. I want you to know that my choices were mine. Do not carry them. You were never made to carry other people's choices, not your father's, not mine, not anyone else's. You were made to be precisely what you are, which I have not always been generous enough to acknowledge. I was too careful with power and too careless with people. I should have known that the magic chooses what it chooses, and no human institution, however old, can long stand against the genuine article. If the sovereigns are real, and they will be, or you wouldn't be reading this, help them. Not because I failed, because you haven't yet. I love you. GA in the entrance hall held the silence. Malfoy took the letter back, folded it, put it in his inner pocket, and said nothing. He walked past them toward the corridor, his posture very straight, and neither Harry nor Hermione said anything because some moments require nothing but space. Harry looked at Hermione. She knew, Hermione said quietly. She knew. She let Warrington run anyway. She'd given 40 years to it, he said. You don't stop a 40-year project because you've started to doubt it, even if you should. He paused. She stopped it the only way she could. Hermione thought about Rowena's archive. About people who built things in hope. About the difference between being right and being willing to act on it in time. Let's go destroy a mirror, she said. They went to the lakeshore. The afternoon was cold and bright, the lake flat and pewter-colored under November light, the mountains beyond it doing the thing they did in clear weather where they looked close enough to touch. Harry set the containment case on the grass and Hermione opened it, and the glass lay in its velvet hollow with its disconcerting, not quite reflective surface. Together, she said, the counter-resonance has to come from both of us simultaneously. If one fires a fraction of a second before the other, the glass absorbs the first pulse and amplifies it back. What happens then? Nothing pleasant. She looked at the glass, then at him. We need to be in sync. Not just casting the same spell, actually in sync, the binding's resonance generating both pulses as a single frequency. He looked at her. How do we do that? Rowena's archive had a specific method. She paused. You're not going to like it. Tell me. Eye contact, sustained the whole time. The resonance calibrates through. She stopped. Started again with the clinical efficiency that was her armor for the things that required it. Through the primary sensory connection, which in most human beings is visual, we look at each other. The binding uses that as its alignment mechanism, and the spell fires from both of us at exactly the same moment. Harry was quiet for a moment. That's not that bad. I told you weren't going to like it. I said I don't like things before I know what they are. This isn't actually, he gestured vaguely. It's fine. It requires concentration, she said. I have concentration. Sustained concentration. Hermione, I hunted Horcruxes for a year. I have sustained concentration. Right, she positioned herself opposite him, the glass on the ground between them. One's out, on 3 we start, and we don't look away from each other until it's done. Whatever happens, whatever the glass does, keep your eyes on me. On you, he said. She looked at him, he looked at her. And in the half-second before she began the count, something happened that she'd been circling for 4 days. The binding between them, which had been a warmth and a presence and a background hum, sharpened into something more deliberate, more specific, as though it too had heard what she and Harry had said in the archive and was attending with fresh intention. 1, she said. 2, 3. The magic came from both of them simultaneously, and it wasn't like any spell she'd cast before, not a directed force but a frequency, the binding generating it between them with the ease of something that had been waiting to be asked. It was gold, like the courtyard light, and it moved like sound moves in waves, and when it hit the resonance glass, the glass rang. A single high, clear note that stretched and then fractured, the sound breaking into harmonics and then into silence, and the mirror shattered into 16 pieces that lay in the winter grass like teeth. They both exhaled. 16, Harry said. Told you. He looked down at the pieces, then back at her. The eye contact, which had been instrumental, had not broken yet, and they were both aware of this with the slightly heightened awareness of two people who have just done something coordinated and physically intimate in the way that any deeply synchronized action is physically intimate, and the binding between them was doing something that could only be described as pleased. About what we discussed, he said. In the archive, she agreed. The part where we stopped treating it as incidental. Yes. I want to say something, he said. All right. He looked at her the way he'd been looking at her increasingly since the binding, not with the careful management of someone checking the appropriate level of a feeling, but with the full directness of someone who had stopped finding reasons not to. You are the person I want to be doing all of this with, he said. Not because the magic paired us and not because we're good at it together, although we are, but because it's you. It was always going to be you. He paused. I just needed to stop being an idiot about it for long enough to say it. She looked at him in the cold November afternoon with the shattered glass between them and the lake at their backs and thought, here, this is what it feels like to be chosen rather than needed. It was always going to be you too, she said. For the record. I know, he said slightly ruefully. I think I've known for a while. Years, she said. Years, he agreed. We were quite remarkably oblivious. Speak for yourself, she raised an eyebrow. Harry Potter, you dated Ginny Weasley. And you dated Victor Crumb and Ron Weasley. That's fair. A pause. We're having this conversation next to a pile of shattered cursed mirror fragments. Would you prefer somewhere nicer? No, she said and meant it. I like it here. She looked at the lake, then back at him. Then because they'd both been orbiting long enough and the binding was essentially insisting, and Rowena's archive had made the case more than thoroughly, she stepped across the shattered pieces and he met her halfway, and the kiss was quiet and certain and entirely unsurprised, the way things feel when they've been inevitable long enough to stop being frightening. When they separated, the binding between them was doing something that could only be described as structural, not louder, not flashier, but deeper, the way a foundation deepens when the last stone is placed, like a note finding its full resonance. The tuning fork thing, Harry said. Yes, Hermione said. That's exactly what that was. They stood by the lake in the afternoon light, and neither of them reached for a metaphor because none of them needed one. Tomorrow, she said eventually. Tomorrow, he agreed. We ready? She thought about the archive, about Rowena's careful preparations, about Adelaide not writing a letter she hoped someone would find, about 47 protective enchantments in the walls of the castle and 16 pieces of a shattered mirror in the grass. Yes, she said, comprehensively. The evening briefing with Kingsley took 3 hours and went better than it had any right to. They spread Adelaide Nott's records across the conference table in what had been designated as the temporary ministry suite, a set of rooms in the castle's east wing that Hermione had quietly ensured remained under the castle's own enchantments rather than any ministry-installed wards, which Rowena had suggested with characteristic pragmatism. Kingsley sat across from them with Octavia Fenn and a legal specialist named Paris who had the compressed attention of a terrier and was visibly excited about the documents in the way that certain lawyers are visibly excited about good evidence. 7 Wisengamot members, Paris said, going through the membership records. That's if this is authenticated. It will be, Hermione said. The documents include Veritaserum witness signatures on 3 separate membership oaths. Adelaide Nott's signature on the authentication is notarized under the 1847 Magical Records Act. She slid the relevant pages across. The authentication is unimpeachable. Paris looked at Kingsley with the expression of a lawyer who has just been handed a case that will define their career. Kingsley looked at the documents with the expression of a man who is glad he decided early to be on the right side of something. The 7 compromised members need to be recused before the session tomorrow, Harry said. If they're still seated when the challenge is heard, even if it fails, they can claim procedural contamination and bring it back. Agreed, Kingsley said. I'll have Auras deliver the recusal notices tonight. He paused. They'll deny everything. They can deny everything after the session, Hermione said. We just need them out of the chamber tomorrow. She looked at Kingsley. And we need full session access. Not as witnesses, not under ministry escort. We walk in as sovereigns and we're recognized as such before any business begins. Kingsley was quiet for a moment. The Wisengamot will object. Some of them, Harry said. The ones who haven't been paying attention to the last 4 days, the ones who will know which direction this is going. He held Kingsley's gaze. You called an election 6 weeks ago. Your constituency is everyone who survived the last year. Give them something to vote for. Kingsley looked at him, then at Hermione, then with the decision visible in his face as a kind of clarity that hadn't been there at the start of the meeting. All right. He nodded once firmly. I'll call the session to order personally. When you enter, I'll recognize you first. Thank you, Hermione said. One more thing. She placed a single document on the table, not from Adelaide's records, but from Rowena's archive, a copy she'd made carefully, the Sovereign Recognition Charter. Rowena Ravenclaw drafted it 830 years ago in anticipation of exactly this situation. It's never been formally adopted because there was never a sovereign to recognize. She looked at Kingsley. We'd like it put to a vote tomorrow. Paris was already reading it. His expression moved through surprise and into something that was professionally satisfied. The language is extraordinary. The structural implications for the relationship between sovereign magic and ministerial governance are deliberate, Hermione said. She was thinking 9 moves ahead. Kingsley read it. Harry watched him read, watched him understand what he was looking at, not a challenge to ministry authority, but a framework that defined the relationship between the sovereigns and the existing governance structure in terms that were cooperative rather than competitive. A partnership codified. A constraint on both sides that protected both sides. She wrote this for you, Kingsley said. She wrote it for whoever came, Harry said. We're whoever came. Kingsley set the document down. I'll present it as a ministerial recommendation. He looked at Harry with the expression of a man who has revised his position significantly since their first meeting and is not sorry about it. You know, most of the chamber will still be hostile. I know, Harry said. That's fine. Hostility is honest. Managed hostility can be worked with. He paused. It's the 7 compromised members I was worried about, now I'm not. They were done by 11. Paris took the documents, Fen took the recusal list, and Kingsley walked them to the door of the ministry suite with the particular manner of someone who wants to say something and is still finding the form. Potter, he said when they were in the corridor, for what it's worth, I think Albus underestimated you in a specific way. Harry looked at him. He thought he was preparing you to be a sacrifice, Kingsley said. He forgot to prepare you to be a person. He paused. You managed that part on your own. Harry was quiet for a moment. With help, he said. Kingsley glanced at Hermione, who was finding something very interesting to look at on the corridor wall. Yes, he said, clearly, and went back into the suite. The morning of the Wisengamot session arrived cold and certain, the way all important mornings do, the world indifferent to the significance of what's happening in it, the light coming in at the usual angle, the castle waking up around them with the normal sounds of an institution that has survived a great deal and plans to continue. Harry and Hermione had breakfast in the Great Hall with Ron, who had been fully briefed and had processed all of it overnight into his characteristic pragmatic form, which meant he had questions that were specific and practical and betrayed that he'd been thinking carefully about everything. The 7 members, he said, they'll have told Warrington about the recusal notices by now. Yes, Hermione said, so he knows the legal strategy is compromised. Yes. Which means when you walk in, he tries something else, Harry said. Something physical or something psychological, we're ready for both. Ron looked at Harry. You're not nervous at all, are you? Harry considered it. No, he said, and it was true, and he recognized the truth of it without finding it strange. It was the binding's clarity, yes, but it was also something more personal, the specific calm of someone who has stopped being afraid of rooms that were designed to intimidate him. He'd faced worse rooms. He'd faced rooms where the person at the center of them wanted him dead. The Wisengamot was full of people who wanted him managed, which was considerably less threatening. Terrifying, Ron said again, but he said it with a grin now, and it was the grin of a best friend watching someone come into themselves and being, despite everything, delighted by it. Malfoy arrived at the table without being invited and sat across from them with the practiced neutrality of someone who has not yet fully formed the habit of belonging somewhere and is working on it. He had the recusal list in front of him. Edwina Crouch's name is on here, he said. She's been on the Wisengamot for 30 years. She'll take the recusal as a personal insult. She can take it however she likes, Harry said, as long as she takes it. And Warrington himself. Not on the Wisengamot, Hermione said. He'll be in the gallery, we expect him to be. She looked at Malfoy. Can you sit in the chamber today, not the gallery, the floor? You're technically still a Hogwarts student and McGonagall has agreed to request observer seats for current students with relevant testimony. Malfoy looked at her. You want me on the floor? I want you visible. You've publicly gone on record against the Hollow Court. Your presence in that chamber says something that words don't. She met his eyes. You don't have to testify, just sit there and be yourself. A pause. Being myself in a room full of people who have been reading about me in the Prophet. Being yourself, she confirmed. The version you've chosen, not the one you were born into. Malfoy was quiet for a moment then, with the dry precision that was one of his more authentic qualities. You're very good at that. At what? Making the thing that costs something sound like the obvious choice. It usually is the obvious choice, she said. It just costs something, those aren't contradictory facts. He almost smiled. It wasn't quite a smile, more the approaching weather of a smile, the kind of expression that suggests smiles are available in the region. Fine, he said. I'll sit on the floor. Ron finished his eggs. Right, he said, standing. I'm going to go find a seat in the gallery with a good angle. George wanted to come. I told him he could if he promised not to set anything on fire. He paused. He promised, but I want to be nearby just in case. He looked at Harry, and the look was the look of 7 years of wizard's chess at midnight and dragons and a tournament lake and a tent in the middle of nowhere and everything that comes with choosing someone and being right about them. You're going to be excellent, he said simply. He left before Harry could answer, which was very Ron. Neville appeared at the other end of the table long enough to say, I'll be in the gallery too. Hannah's coming. Half the DA is coming. Actually, word got around. He looked at them both with the particular intensity of someone who has grown a great deal in a short time and is still slightly surprised by it. Just so you know, there are people in that room on your side. He left too. Harry and Hermione sat at the breakfast table in the Great Hall of Hogwarts on the morning of the Wisengamot session, and the light came through the cracked, enchanted ceiling at its usual angle, showing something between sunrise and ordinary morning. Ready, she said. Yes, he said. Then you know what I was thinking about last night. What? Rowena building the archive for someone she'd never meet. He looked at the ceiling. 800 years of waiting just in case. He paused. I kept thinking about all the people who built things on the chance that they'd be useful without knowing if they ever would be. Rowena, your parents putting you through school, Dumbledore for all his failures building the Order, even Adelaide not in the end writing that letter. He turned to look at her, people betting on a future they couldn't see. She understood what he was doing, grounding himself, finding the larger frame, which was how Harry at his most functional operated. Not inspiration exactly, more like orientation, finding the cardinal directions. And now with their future, she said. And now with their future, he agreed. He stood. Let's go justify the bet. The Wizengamot chamber was beneath the Ministry of Magic, 6 levels down, through corridors that had been cleaned and repaired since the fall of Voldemort but still carried the particular atmospheric weight of a space where very consequential things had happened for a very long time. The ceiling was high and domed, the member seats arranged in a horseshoe around a central floor, the gallery above packed in a way that galleries rarely were for ordinary sessions. It was not an ordinary session. Harry was aware of the room before they entered it. The castle's enchantments didn't extend here, but the binding did, that ambient awareness of magical states extending naturally through the fabric of wizarding Britain. He could feel the chamber's own old enchantments, the Veritaserum trace charms woven into the floor, the sound projection spells in the ceiling, the attention-holding wards that ensured every member remained focused on current business. He noted all of it with the same matter-of-fact attention. He noted the position of the doors. He walked in with Hermione at his right because that was where she was and he didn't arrange it. It was simply the position they'd arrived at by walking next to each other, which was itself a kind of answer to a question the chamber was already asking. The sound from the gallery when they entered was not quite applause and not quite murmur, something between, the sound of a large number of people registering something. He didn't look up at the gallery. He walked to the center of the floor, and Hermione walked with him, and they stopped in the position that the center of the horseshoe indicated. Kingsley was already at the presiding bench. He made eye contact with Harry for exactly 1 second, and then he raised his gavel. "The Wizengamot is now in session," Kingsley said, and his voice carried through the chamber with the practiced ease of someone who had used this space before. "Before any other business is addressed, I am exercising ministerial privilege to formally recognize the sovereign named under the ancient magic of wizarding Britain." He paused. Harry James Potter and Hermione Jean Granger, recognized and recorded. A third of the chamber immediately began talking. Lady Isolde not Adelaide, Harry corrected himself, but another not, a different generation. A woman in her 70s with silver hair and a posture that contained 40 years of conviction stood from her seat without waiting to be recognized. "Minister," she said, and her voice cut across the ambient noise with the clean precision of someone who had been silencing rooms for decades. "This recognition is premature at best and deeply irregular at worst. The sovereign binding is a historical curiosity, not a recognized legal status. Under the Sovereign Recognition Charter presented to this body this morning," Kingsley said, not raising his voice, "it is precisely that. The charter, drafted by Rowena Ravenclaw in 1193 and authenticated by the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, provides the legal framework for. An 800-year-old document has no standing in current." "Lady Not," Harry said. He said it at a normal volume. He said it without any particular force. He said it the way you say someone's name when you are looking at them from across a room and want their attention. The chamber went quiet. He'd noticed this happening before in smaller rooms with smaller crowds, the specific quality of silence that arrived when he spoke in the particular way the binding allowed. It wasn't compulsion, nothing like it. It was closer to the silence that falls when something is said that everyone in the room recognizes as true. "You've lost 7 seats this morning," he said. "Your colleagues have been asked to recuse on the basis of documented Hollow Court membership, and they've recused because the documentation is unimpeachable." He looked at her directly, not unkindly, just clearly. "The legal challenge you planned can't proceed with the votes you need to sustain it. The dissolution ritual can't be performed because the instrument it required is in 16 pieces in a field in Scotland. The narrative strategy failed the day after you tried it, when 4 members of your organization walked into Hogwarts and walked out considerably faster." He paused. "You have a speech prepared. I've seen its structure in the correspondence we recovered from the Knot Vault." He held her gaze. "Give it if you want, I'll wait." The chamber was very still. Lady Knot, who was not Adelaide, not Warrington, but something in between, someone who had inherited a conviction and was smart enough to be genuinely uncertain about it, looked at him with an expression that was doing complicated work. "You recovered Adelaide's records," she said. It came out quieter than her previous words. "We did. Then you know the depth of it, the history, the reason this isn't." She stopped, found the argument again. "The sovereign binding concentrates power in 2 individuals who are accountable to no body, no process, no institution. However good your intentions," Harry said, "the Hollow Court has spent 9 centuries deciding who magic belongs to, and what it's decided consistently is that magic belongs to the people who were born closest to it." He looked at her. "Not the most able, not the most committed, the most born." He paused. "I'm telling you that this is over. Not because we're forcing it to be over, because the thing you've been maintaining doesn't work, and it hasn't worked, and the proof of that is the last 7 years of wizarding Britain." He looked at the full chamber, at the members, at the gallery. "We're not here to take anything from anyone. We're here because the magic named us, and it named us for the same reason it's always named someone eventually, because things need doing that the existing institutions have failed to do." He paused. "The Charter gives this body oversight. It gives the minister a formal relationship with the sovereignty. It creates accountability in both directions." He looked at Kingsley. "Put it to a vote." Kingsley put it to a vote. The Charter passed 61 to 29. The 29 votes were almost entirely expected, the old blood families, the ones who needed more time, the ones for whom this was too fast. Harry noted every one of them without rancor, because 29 people in a room of 90 who needed more time were not enemies. They were a project. Lady Knott had not voted. She had sat with her hands folded throughout the vote, and when it was over she looked at Harry from across the chamber floor and said quietly, with a precision that carried to him and perhaps no further, "Adelaide's letter. What did it say?" He held her gaze. That she should have known the magic chooses what it chooses. He paused, and that she was sorry she was too careful with power and too careless with people. Lady Knott was still for a long moment. "She was a very frustrating woman," she said finally. "I believe that," Harry said. Something in her posture shifted, not surrender, not conversion, something more like a preliminary acknowledgement of a reality that required further review. She sat down. She didn't look at Harry again during the session, but she didn't disrupt it either, and that in the specific calculus of the Wisengamot was its own kind of statement. The session continued for 2 more hours, working through the reconstruction agenda Hermione had prepared with Kingsley's team, the restoration framework, the asset return process for families affected by Death Eater seizures, the establishment of a sovereign advisory to the ministry. She presented most of it, efficiently and with the specific clarity of someone who has memorized the rebuttal to every likely objection and can deploy it before the objection is fully formed. Harry answered questions that were pointed at him with the directness that was his best quality in rooms like this. Cassius Warrington was in the gallery. Harry had seen him the moment they entered, a broad-shouldered man in his mid-30s with the look of someone running a calculation that isn't producing the expected results. He'd remained seated throughout. He hadn't acted. Without the glass, without the 7 votes, without the dissolution ritual, he had nothing to deploy except his presence, which Harry had neutralized by naming it casually in his opening statement. Near the end of the session, Harry looked up at the gallery once. Warrington met his gaze. Harry held it for 3 seconds evenly, without challenge or hostility, just the clear-eyed acknowledgement of one person by another, and then he turned back to the chamber business. In the gallery, Ron had been watching Warrington too. He caught Harry's eye and made a small gesture. "He's leaving." Warrington was indeed rising from his seat, moving quietly toward the gallery exit, not running, just deciding that there was nothing further to be gained here. Harry let him go. Some battles were won in the chamber, some were won in the weeks and months and careful subsequent conversations that followed. Warrington would be one of those. The legal consequences of the documents alone would keep him occupied for years, and a man occupied by legal consequences was a man who had stopped planning operations. The session ended at 2:30. As they rose from the center floor, Malfoy appeared at Harry's left shoulder. He'd been on the observer seats along the chamber wall throughout, present and visible and saying nothing, which was exactly what had been required. He looked tired, in the way of someone who has spent several hours being looked at. "How many people stared at you?" Harry asked. "All of them," Malfoy said, "constantly, including the portraits." He paused. "Your opening statement was good. The part about accountability in both directions, that was the part that got the fence-sitters." "Hermione's framing," Harry said. "I know," Malfoy said. "I recognized it." He looked across the chamber to where Hermione was in conversation with Paris and Fenn, already working on the implementation schedule. "She's remarkable, you know, objectively." "I know," Harry said. "I spent 6 years being awful to her." "You did." "I should. You have been," Harry said. "She knows." He looked at Malfoy sideways. "She also thinks Rowena was right about you." Malfoy was quiet for a moment. "What did Rowena say about me?" "That you chose to become different than what you were made." Harry paused. "That it's rare and that it's valuable." Malfoy absorbed this with the expression of a man receiving something he doesn't know what to do with yet but intends to think about carefully. Hermione appeared at Harry's right shoulder. "Paris wants a follow-up session next week on the asset framework. I've scheduled it for Tuesday." She looked between them. "Ready to go?" "Yes," Harry said. They walked out of the Wisengamot chamber, 3 of them, through the corridor and toward the lift, and the gallery was emptying above them, and people were talking in the particular animated way of people who have just witnessed something historic and are trying to determine what to do with that. In the lift going up, Ron joined them from the gallery stairs, slightly out of breath. "George wanted me to tell you," he said, "that the 29 no votes are going to be yes votes within 6 months, and he'll bet on it." "George is probably right," Hermione said. "He usually is about those things." Ron looked at Harry. "Also, he wants to know if the sovereigns need a joke shop because he has some ideas about how a royal warrant would look on the signage." Harry laughed. "Not the careful, managed version, the real one. Tell him we'll think about it." The lift rose through the ministry levels, carrying them upward, and outside the building London was doing what London does in November, grey and constant and entirely indifferent to the significance of anything, the buses running, the pigeons committed to their business, the whole vast ordinary machinery of the world continuing as it always does. Harry stepped out into it and felt the cold air and the binding in his bones, and Hermione at his right shoulder, and thought, yes, this, exactly this. Chapter 6, The Sovereign's Answer. 3 weeks after the Wisengamot session, Hogwarts began to heal visibly. Not just the structural repairs, though those continued. The East Wing was almost fully restored. The North Tower's connection to the library wards had held without a single degradation since Hermione had stabilized it, and the Great Hall's enchanted ceiling had finally stopped trying to show two weathers simultaneously and had settled into the correct November sky, which was grey and honest and exactly right. The healing Harry meant was the other kind, the kind you couldn't point to. Students had started returning. Not the full school, the Ministry and McGonagall had agreed on a modified return schedule, partial year groups, rebuilding in stages rather than flooding the castle all at once. But there were first years in the corridors again, small and overwhelmed, and asking where things were with the specific bafflement of people who have been told a place is magical without quite believing it until they're standing in a moving staircase. There were fifth years trying to figure out what OWL preparation looked like in a school that had spent the last year under occupation. There were seventh years who had missed so much that the question of catching up felt insurmountable until a teacher sat with them and showed them the specific next step, and then the one after. Hermione had taken to doing this informally, sitting in the library in the evenings, not officially tutoring, just available, which was the most Hermione possible way to be helpful without triggering her own complicated feelings about authority and designation. Harry found her there most nights when he came in from whatever structural work or outdoor training he'd been doing, and she'd be in the middle of explaining something to someone, her voice carrying that particular quality it had when she was actually enjoying the teaching rather than just performing it. He'd sit nearby and do his own reading, and sometimes they'd talk after the students had gone, and the library in those late hours felt like the archive felt purposeful and old and genuinely on their side. McGonagall had officially reinstated as headmistress, which everyone had known would happen and which everyone had been relieved to see confirmed. Her first act had been to designate 2 rooms in the castle as permanent offices for the sovereign named, which Harry and Hermione had accepted with only moderate argument, Hermione's argument being that the rooms were too nice and Harry's argument being that the rooms were too formal, and McGonagall's resolution being that they could make them whatever they liked as long as they stopped arguing with her about it in the corridor. The rooms were in practice primarily used for work. Which was also fine. Rowena's archive had been officially catalogued by Hermione, over 10 days of work that she described as the best 10 days she'd had in recent memory, which Harry believed entirely, and access had been extended to McGonagall and Aldrich, and a small committee of scholars who had signed agreements that were significantly more binding than standard confidentiality documents. Rowena herself had expressed approval of this arrangement through the medium of appearing in the library at 3 in the morning and saying adequate before dissolving back into the stonework. Coming from Rowena, adequate was apparently a strong positive. The Hollow Court investigation had moved quickly once Adelaide Knott's records were in Paris's hands. Warrington had been arrested 11 days after the Wisengamot session on charges that filled 4 parchment pages, and the remaining inner circle had dissolved with the specific speed of people who'd been banking on a leader who was no longer available. 3 of the 6 had turned themselves in, 2 had left Britain. 1, Piers Rookwood, the Elmwand man from the entrance hall, had requested a meeting with Harry directly, which Harry had attended alone, because the meeting was clearly an attempt to negotiate, and negotiations required exactly 1 sovereign and not 2. Rookwood had been 26, which was younger than Harry had expected, and he'd had the expression of someone who had joined something at 20 that had seemed like righteous tradition, and was now looking at what it actually was from the wrong side of an arrest warrant. Harry had listened to him for 30 minutes, asked 6 questions, and told Paris afterward which 3 pieces of information Rookwood had given him were genuine, and which 2 were attempts at misdirection. Paris had looked at him with the expression of a man recalibrating something. "How did you know?" Paris asked. "He believed the genuine things," Harry said. "The other 2 had the feeling of performances." Paris had written something in his notes that Harry didn't read. The 29 Wisengamot members who had voted against the charter had, as George predicted, been moving, not converted. Conversion was the wrong frame. More like recalibrating, the way you recalibrate an instrument when you realize the measurements have been coming out wrong. Lady Knott specifically had requested a meeting 3 days after the session, which she'd used to ask very precise questions about the Charter's oversight provisions, and to offer, with the compressed dignity of someone who finds apology structurally difficult, a set of suggested amendments that were actually quite good. Hermione had incorporated 2 of them. None of this had been fast or easy or clean because nothing political ever was, and Harry had stopped expecting clean a long time ago, but it was moving, and movement, after years of stasis and fear and the particular paralysis of a world living under something too large to fight directly, was remarkable in itself. Rowena appeared on a Tuesday evening, which was unusual. She generally operated at late-night hours, as though the castle's attention was more available when the students were asleep and the corridors were quiet. Tuesday at 7 in the library, with Hermione mid-sentence explaining arithmetic sequencing to a very small Ravenclaw second year, was not her typical entrance. Hermione stopped mid-sentence. The second year looked at the translucent figure sitting in the window seat and said with the admirable composure of a child raised in a world where this was technically possible, "Is that a ghost?" "Sort of," Hermione said. "Could you give us a moment, please?" The second year collected her notes and left with the specific dignity of someone who intends to tell this story forever. Rowena watched this with the expression she used when she found something genuinely amusing but had decided not to let it land as a smile. "She has good instincts," she said. "The small one." "Alice Pemberton," Hermione said. "Yes, she's going to be remarkable." She looked at Rowena. "It's early for you. I have something to tell you and I would prefer to do it with you both present and rested rather than at 2 in the morning when you are running on stubbornness and tea." She looked around the library. "Where is he?" "Castle grounds, training." Hermione said this with the tone of someone who has an opinion about the frequency of these training sessions and is choosing not to deploy it currently. "He'll be back before dinner." "Fetch him," Rowena said. "What I have to say is not emergency-shaped, but it is," she paused, choosing with the care of someone who has had 800 years to develop precision. "Consequential," Hermione sent a patroness. She'd gotten very good at this. The otter came easily now, quickly, with the warm water certainty of magic that was entirely at home. Harry arrived 8 minutes later, which was faster than 8 minutes should have allowed for the distance from the castle grounds, but the binding appeared to have upgraded whatever his baseline physical capability had been, and his definition of a comfortable running pace had consequently shifted. He was still catching his breath when he sat down. Rowena waited with the patience of someone for whom waiting cost nothing. "Well," he said, looking at her. "Yes," she said. "Well," she looked at both of them with the needle-sharp attention that was her most consistent quality. "I owe you something, an explanation I've been not withholding but holding until I was certain you were ready for it." She paused. "I am now certain." "What explanation?" Hermione said. "Why you?" Rowena said simply. "Specifically." "The binding chooses based on resonance." "Yes, we've established this. But resonance is a necessary condition, not a sufficient one. There have been other resonant pairs in 1,000 years, others who might have been named." She held their gaze, both of them, the look distributed with the equality of someone who had been watching two people and had the same thing to say to each. "It chose you at this specific moment because of what you did." "The war," Harry said. "Not the war, what you did in the war." Leaned forward slightly, the motion giving her a slight increase in presence. "There is a moment that the ancient magic marks as a sovereign point, not a triumph, not a victory, a choice." She looked at Harry. "You chose to die willingly, with full understanding, no hope of return." She paused. "And you chose it not for power or legacy or even survival of the people you loved. You chose it because it was right, because the logic of it was correct and the cost was yours to pay." She looked at Hermione. "And you chose to continue, to keep 7 people alive in a tent in the wilderness for a year on nothing but will and preparation and the refusal to believe it was over, when every rational assessment said it probably was." She paused. "Both of these choices were at their core the same choice. Service before self," Harry said slowly. "More precise than that," Rowena said. "The willingness to act correctly when acting correctly is the most expensive possible option." She settled back. The magic had been looking for someone who would not corrupt the binding by using it for self-interest, because the binding amplifies everything, including self-interest. It needed people for whom the correct action was genuinely prior to the personally beneficial one. She paused, and it found 2 of them in resonance at the same moment in history. The library held this. "How rare is that?" Hermione asked. "You are the second occurrence in the totality of magical history," Rowena said. "The first was Elara, who had lasted 23 years, the only successful case." "What happened to her?" Harry asked. "The Codex says she died of natural causes at 73, but the how of it, the binding at the end, released it willingly," Rowena said. "When she was ready, when her work was complete." A pause. "This is the thing about the binding that no previous sovereign fully understood, and that I was not able to explain to Elara because she came before I understood it myself. The binding is not a permanent appointment, it is not a life sentence. It is," she looked at the ceiling briefly, the gesture of someone reaching for the right word. "An assignment perhaps is close. It stays as long as it is needed and you are willing. When either condition ceases, it releases gently if done consciously. Catastrophically if the drift goes too far before the release is chosen." "So we could release it," Harry said. "Willingly when we decided to." "Yes, and the magic would not be harmed and you would not be harmed. You would simply return to what you were, which would still be considerably more than most people." She met his eyes. "This is important to understand now because the next several years will offer you many excellent reasons to hold the binding past its useful point. Institutional inertia, people who need you, work that isn't finished, the sense that releasing it is abandonment." She paused. "None of those are good reasons. The only good reason to hold it is that the work genuinely requires it. And when it doesn't," Hermione said. "You'll know," Rowena said, "if you're paying attention, which I expect you will be given your collective track record on that front." A brief, genuine pause. "You are, for the record, considerably better at this than I expected, and I expected quite a lot." Harry looked at her. "Was that a compliment?" "It was an accurate statement," Rowena said. "Do not conflate them." Hermione smiled into her notebook. Rowena's gaze touched this and moved on with the precision of someone who notices everything and deploys it selectively. "One more thing," Rowena said. "I will not be here indefinitely." The castle has maintained me as long as it needed to, as long as there was no sovereign to receive what I needed to give. Now that there is, the purpose of my presence is fulfilled. She said it without drama or self-pity, simply as fact. I am not going imminently, but I want you to understand this so that when I go it is not a loss, it is a completion. Hermione put down her pen. We're not going to pretend that's not a loss, she said directly. Rowena looked at her. And something crossed her face that was not quite what you'd call an emotion from a human being, but functioned as one, the impression of being moved, of having been seen correctly by someone, which was perhaps the most particular pleasure available to a person who has been in some form alone for 800 years. No, she said more quietly. I don't suppose you will. She paused. Good, I have always found dishonest comfort more offensive than honest grief. We know, Harry said. She looked at them both for a moment longer, with the expression of someone taking a precise, intentional accounting of a thing they value. Then she faded into the stonework, and the library was ordinary again, and they sat in it for a while without needing to talk. Ron came to find them after dinner. He came the way he always came, without announcement, without the particular social performance of someone entering a scene, just arriving because he'd decided to and sitting down. He had a chess set under one arm and the expression of a person who has been thinking about something for several days and has finally resolved it into words. They were in the room McGonagall had designated as Hermione's office. She'd furnished it in a way that Harry had described as library that also has chairs, and she'd described as functional, and they'd both agreed it was right. He was reading something at the desk in the corner. She was at the main table with 3 books open and a 4th on her lap, in the specific posture of someone engaged in actual work rather than preparatory work. Ron set the chess set on the table, pushing Hermione's books aside with the confidence of a man who had been pushing Hermione's books aside since they were 11 and had developed a system. Oi, she said without looking up from her current book. It's a chess set, Hermione, it needs 4 inches of table space. He sat down. Harry. Come play in a minute, Harry said. That's a lie and we both know it. Come play, you need to stop reading that thing. He looked at what Harry was reading. What is that even? The voting records for the Wisengamots last 40 years, trying to identify the pattern in the no votes from the last session. I'll tell you the pattern, Ron said. Old families scared of change need time. Done. Chess. Harry put the record down. You've been thinking about something, he said, because Ron had a specific quality of pre-conversation stillness that was distinctive. I've been thinking about several things, Ron said. He set up the chess pieces with the automatic ease of someone who has been doing this since childhood. I've been thinking about what I'm going to do. What do you mean? Hermione looked up fully now. Post all of this, or not post, because this doesn't really end, does it? But I've been helping because you needed help. Running interference, doing the logistical things, being the person who talks to the Weasley family contacts in the ministry because I know everyone and they take my calls. He pushed a pawn forward. That's been useful, I know it's been useful, but I need to figure out what I'm actually doing, not just what's needed in the moment. The auras, Harry said. You've been talking about it. I have been talking about it. Ron paused. After Fred, he stopped, in the specific way he always stopped when he reached that sentence, still finding the right form for it. After Fred, I thought maybe I should do something, I don't know, quieter, something where the risks were more personal, for me rather than for everyone around me. He looked at the chessboard. But the more I think about it, the more I think that the thing I'm actually good at is the thing I've been avoiding. Strategy, reading people. Knowing when something is a trap before it springs. He looked up. That's aura work. That's good aura work, Harry said. There's a difference. I know. Ron moved another piece. I also know that the aura core as it currently stands is a mess. Half the senior team was compromised, the training program hasn't been updated since the First War, and the investigation methodology is, he paused, looking slightly surprised at himself. I have opinions about their investigation methodology. I've been reading their procedural documents, Hermione said, with the tone of someone recognizing a pattern they find endearing. You left them in the common room, Ron said, slightly defensively. They were just there. I didn't say it wasn't a good idea, I said you'd been reading them. The point is, Ron said to Harry with the composure of a man redirecting away from an argument he's already lost, I want to rebuild it, not just join it, actually rebuild what it is from the inside. He paused. I think I can do that. Harry looked at him, thought about Ron at 11 on a chessboard already thinking 4 moves ahead, thought about Ron in the ministry atrium managing a situation while Harry fought, thought about Ron running interference with a professionalism that looked casual but wasn't, had never been. You can do that, Harry said. Absolutely, and when you need it, I know I can come to you. Ron waved this away. Obviously. This isn't the kind of friendship where that becomes awkward. He paused. Is it? No, Harry said simply. Good. Ron looked at Hermione. I want to rebuild the Department for the Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures, she said immediately, as though she'd been waiting for the question. New name, new mandate. Full legal personhood for sentient magical beings, proper representation structures, an actual legislative framework that doesn't treat house elves like furniture and werewolves like criminals. She looked at her books. And I want to finish my NEWTS because I refuse to have an incomplete secondary education. Ron and Harry both looked at her. You're going back to 7th year, Ron said. We all are, she said. Harry, you can't tell me you weren't considering it. I was not considering it, Harry said. You should be. The sovereign recognition doesn't require formal qualifications, but the work we're doing requires. Hermione. The intellectual infrastructure that proper academic completion. Hermione. She stopped. I'll think about it, he said. That's all I'm asking. She returned to her books with the composure of someone who is entirely aware that I'll think about it is being deployed as a holding strategy, and is choosing to accept it as a partial victory. Ron looked at Harry with an expression of profound sympathy. Harry picked up the chess piece Ron had moved and assessed the board. He moved a knight. Ron looked at the position, and his expression went from sympathy to the focused attention of someone who has just been offered an interesting problem. You've gotten better, Ron said. I've been practicing. With who? Harry glanced at Hermione. Ron followed the glance. You play chess with Harry now, Ron said to her. Occasionally, she didn't look up. And I lose approximately 60% of the time, she said with the specific tone of someone who finds a statistic personally offensive, which is improving. I was at 80% when we started. She beat me last Tuesday, Harry said. It was a fluke, Hermione said. It was not a fluke, Harry said. You engineered it from move 12. I saw it afterward. I said it was a fluke. You're embarrassed that you enjoyed it. I'm not. She looked up, looked at the two of them. I beat him in 17 moves, she said with the compressed dignity of someone no longer pretending. It was quite good. It was very good, Harry confirmed. Ron put his face in his hands in the specific gesture of a man experiencing something he has no vocabulary for. He said from behind his hands, right, yes, this makes complete sense. Of course you two have found a way to be competitive and educational and emotionally significant all at the same time. He lowered his hands. Are you happy, he said, not the way Ginny had asked it, though the question was the same. This was Ron's version, which came with 6 years of shared context and the particular weight of a friend who has watched you be unhappy for a very long time. Yes, Harry said, genuinely. Ron said, not because it's the right answer yes, but actual yes. Actual yes, Harry said. Ron looked at Hermione. Yes, she said without looking up, and the simplicity of it, the complete absence of qualification, was its own kind of answer. Ron sat back in his chair. Good, he said. Fred would have had absolutely appalling things to say about this development, and I miss him every time I think about that. He moved a chess piece. Play, they played. The fire in the grate did its work, and outside the castle the November dark settled into itself, and the corridor beyond the door had the sounds of students moving between dinner and their common rooms, and all of it was ordinary in the specific way that things are ordinary when they've been earned rather than assumed. Rowena came to them for the last time on a Friday. Not the library, not the tower, not the archive. She appeared in the corridor outside their offices at 9:30 in the morning, which was the most unusual choice she'd made, temporally speaking. She was more distinct than Harry had ever seen her, not more solid but more present, the way a photograph is present when the light is hitting it exactly right. He was on his way to meet Kingsley. Hermione was already inside, having started 45 minutes earlier because Hermione's relationship with scheduled start times was consistent. Today, Rowena said. Harry looked at her. You're sure? The castle will maintain me as long as there's a purpose, and the purpose is complete. I've given you everything in the archive, everything I know about the binding and its history, everything I could build for you in 800 years of preparation. She held his gaze with the needle-sharp attention that had been her most consistent quality since the first night. You don't need me anymore, which is the precise outcome I was hoping for. That doesn't mean, I know, she said. It's all right, I'm telling you now so that you can. She paused. Tell Hermione. She will want to know while there's still time to say something. She is not a person who tolerates not having said the thing. I know, he said. I also want to tell you something directly without the framing of historical precedent or strategic information. She stood very still in the corridor, the stone of the walls faintly present through her. Are going to be good at this, both of you, not because you have the power or the intelligence or even the character, though you have all of those things, because you are genuinely, fundamentally interested in other people. She paused. Every sovereign who failed was, at root, more interested in the work than the people the work was for. You are constitutionally incapable of that error. The needle-sharp eyes held his. This is not a small thing. This is, in fact, the entire thing. Thank you, Harry said. For everything, the archive, the history, for waiting. 800 years is not so long when you are mostly stone, she said, and there was genuine lightness in it, the particular warmth of someone who has stopped needing to be serious all the time because the serious work is done. Tell Hermione. He went inside. Hermione was at the table with 3 documents and a cup of tea that had gone cold in the way tea always went cold when she was working. She looked up when he came in and read his face immediately, which she'd always been able to do. Rowena, she said. She says today. Hermione put her pen down. She was quiet for a moment, looking at the desk, and then she stood up and said, take me to her. They went back into the corridor. Rowena was still there, and when Hermione came out of the office and looked at her, whatever she'd been composing on the way across the room dissolved into something more immediate, more personal. The thing Hermione's face did when the intellectual scaffolding wasn't needed. You built us a library, Hermione said. It was the most useful thing I could think of, Rowena said. It was perfect. She held the ghost's translucent gaze with the directness she applied to everything that mattered to her. I want you to know that I understand what it cost. 800 years of maintenance, of staying, of caring about something you couldn't know would ever arrive. It was not a burden, Rowena said. It was a purpose. There is a significant difference. I know, Hermione paused. I want to be like that, not like you specifically, though the intellectual legacy is obviously. She stopped, gathered herself. I want to build things for people I'll never meet. I want the work to outlast me in the ways that matter. She looked at Harry briefly, then back at Rowena. I think that's what this is actually, what we're doing, building things for futures we can't see. Yes, Rowena said, that is exactly what it is. A pause, and then Rowena said, with the quality of someone putting down something they've been carrying for a very long time, not relieved exactly, but complete. You are everything I hoped for, both of you, and I hope for quite a great deal. She faded, not dramatically, not with any particular light or sound, simply became less distinct, as if she were stepping back into the wall by degrees, and then was the wall and the corridor was quiet. Hermione stood looking at the space where Rowena had been for a moment. Then she turned, and her eyes were bright, but her posture was entirely steady, and she said, "We have the meeting with Kingsley. In 20 minutes, he said. Right." She looked at the wall one more time. Then quietly to the stone, "Thank you." Nothing answered. The castle held the words the way old walls hold everything, kept them, carried them, made them part of itself. They walked down the corridor toward the meeting. Kingsley was in the temporary minister's office. The permanent offices were being rebuilt. The previous minister's decor had been removed with the enthusiasm of people removing something they'd wanted to remove for some time, and he was at his desk with his sleeves rolled up, which Harry had learned meant he was working on something that required concentration rather than performance. He looked up when they came in, took in their expressions with the quick assessment of a man who paid attention to people. "Is everything all right?" "Yes," Harry said. "We lost someone this morning, but she was ready." Kingsley didn't ask who. He nodded once, and the nod had a weight to it that acknowledged the loss without requiring explanation. "Sit down," he said. "I have something that requires your input." They sat. "The International Confederation of Wizards has formally requested a meeting," Kingsley said. "European Council with potential attendance from the American, Asian, and African delegations. The agenda item is the sovereign binding and its implications for international magical governance." Harry and Hermione absorbed this simultaneously. "They want to know what we mean for international politics," Hermione said. "Essentially," Kingsley leaned back. "Several delegations are concerned that the binding constitutes a shift in the British wizarding world's position relative to international structures. There's significant anxiety, particularly in continental Europe, that a sovereign-level magical authority in Britain creates an imbalance." "What kind of meeting?" Harry asked. "Initially a conversation, no agenda items with binding outcomes, no resolutions, no formal positions, just conversation." He paused. "In 3 months. Who's attending from their side?" Kingsley listed them. Several names Harry recognized from Hermione's briefings on international wizarding politics. The current ICW Supreme Mugwump, a woman named Celestine Beauvais, who had the reputation of being one of the most effective and most ruthless diplomatic minds in European wizarding history. 3 senior delegates, an observer from the American MACUSA. "Beauvais will try to formalize something," Hermione said. "A framework, a treaty, some structure that defines the binding's international standing in terms that primarily serve continental interests." She looked at Harry. "She's been trying to restructure the ICW's power balance for 15 years. This is an opportunity for her." "Is that bad?" Harry asked. She thought about it. "Not inherently. Some of what she wants to restructure needs restructuring." She paused. "It's a question of whether we go in with our own framework or let her set the terms." "We go in with our own framework," Harry said. "Obviously," she agreed. "I'll start working on it this week." She looked at Kingsley. "Can we have the MACUSA observer's background briefing separately from the main delegation file? They'll have a different set of concerns, and I want to address them independently." "I'll have it sent today." Kingsley was looking at them with the expression he'd worn increasingly over the past 3 weeks. Not surprise exactly, but the sustained approval of a man watching people he'd underestimated reveal their actual dimensions. "There's one more thing." He picked up a letter from the desk. "This came from McGonagall this morning. She's recommending that the sovereign offices be formally integrated into the Hogwarts administrative structure permanently, not just for the reconstruction period." Ongoing, Harry looked at the letter. "She wants us to stay. She wants the binding to have a permanent home that isn't the ministry," Kingsley said, "which I think is actually wise. The architecture of the relationship between the sovereignty and the ministry works better with some structural independence. Hogwarts provides that." He paused. "I'm supporting the recommendation, but it's your decision." Harry and Hermione looked at each other. There was no significant deliberation. Hogwarts was the castle that had repaired itself around them, that held Rowena's archive in its 3rd floor, that had 47 protective enchantments in its walls and students coming back to its corridors. It was the place where they'd woken up different and chosen what to do with that. It was the first home Harry had ever had that hadn't been taken away, and it was the place where Hermione had found a library built specifically for her, which was perhaps the most conclusive argument possible. "Yes," Harry said. "Obviously," Hermione added. Kingsley made a note. "Right, I'll confirm with McGonagall." He looked up. "I want to say something off the formal record before we go into the agenda." "Go ahead," Harry said. I came into this 3 weeks ago, the morning after everything, expecting to be managing a crisis. Two very powerful young people with no institutional experience and no political track record, carrying something unprecedented and potentially destabilizing. He folded his hands on the desk. I was prepared to be firm and careful and to spend a great deal of time managing the perceptions around you. He paused. Instead, I've spent 3 weeks watching you manage everything better than anyone I've worked with, including people twice your age with decades of experience. A pause. I want to acknowledge that I came in with the wrong frame and I adjusted it, and you were generous enough not to make that adjustment difficult for me. You adjusted quickly, Harry said. The evidence was compelling. A brief, dry smile. I'm a fairly empirical person. We know, Hermione said. It's one of your best qualities. Kingsley looked at her. Miss Granger, has anyone told you that you are simultaneously one of the most encouraging and most unnerving people they have ever met? Frequently, she said pleasantly. He laughed, the genuine, unexpected version, the laugh of a man who hasn't had much reason for it recently and is slightly surprised to find it available. Right, agenda, the asset restoration framework. They worked for 2 hours, and the work was the kind of work that felt like building rather than managing, specific and consequential and moving in a direction that was visible. The asset restoration framework. The new magical beings representation act that Hermione was steering through the legislative process with the focused determination of someone who had been waiting to do this exact thing for years. The Hogwarts reconstruction completion timeline. The Aura Core reform proposal that Ron had drafted with enough specificity that Kingsley had forwarded it immediately to the relevant department head with a note that amounted to implement this. At the end, walking out of the ministry and into the London afternoon, Harry stopped on the steps and stood in the grey November light for a moment. What? Hermione said. Nothing, just. He looked at the city, at the ordinary machinery of it, the buses and the pigeons and the people moving through their afternoon with no particular awareness of what was happening in any given building. 3 weeks ago I was in the courtyard of Hogwarts not knowing what happened next, and now. He looked at her, she was looking at him, coat pulled close against the November air, the binding between them doing its quiet structural work. Now I know what happens next, he said, which I've never had before. She tilted her head. What happens next? The ICW meeting, the Beings Act, Ron rebuilding the auras, the Wisengamots 29 getting to 18 and then to 5. He paused. NEWTS, apparently, according to someone. Apparently, she said with composure, and after all of that, more of the same, probably, different versions of the same problems, different scales, more people needing things we can help with. She looked back at him, but also she paused in the way she paused when she was being precise about something personal. Also just this, what it is, that's not nothing. No, he agreed, that's very much not nothing. The London afternoon moved around them, indifferent and constant, and the binding hummed in its deepened, settled way, and everything that had been earned in the last 3 weeks was present and accounted for. The archive, the shattered glass, the 61 votes, Rowena's last words in a corridor, Ron at a chessboard, Malfoy choosing something difficult and smaller than what he'd been made for and finding it fit better. Come on, Harry said. McGonagall wanted us back by 5. McGonagall wants everyone back by 5. It's a general policy. She gave us the offices, Hermione. The least we can do is show up when she expects us. She gave us the offices because we needed them, not to generate obligations, Hermione. Though I do agree we should be back by 5, I just want to be clear about the reason we should, Hermione. What? He held out his hand. She took it in the practical, natural way, the way you take the hand of someone who is your primary fact, which was the phrase Rowena had used, and which they'd both been sitting with since. Let's go home, he said. She held his hand in the November afternoon outside the Ministry of Magic, and for a moment she looked at him with an expression she didn't manage or contain or run through any of her usual filters, just let it be fully visible. The entirety of 7 years of being beside him, of being known by him, of every moment when the binding had been present without having a name yet. All of it and then the name. Yes, she said, let's go home. They apparated together, which they'd discovered produced a cleaner arrival than separate apparition, the binding smoothing the transition, the magic entirely comfortable carrying them both. The castle grounds appeared around them in the grey afternoon light, and the castle itself was ahead, warm-windowed and enormous and entirely itself, holding everything it had always held and a few new things besides. They walked toward it across the grounds, and the grass was cold and the mountains were clear and the castle was home, and the binding between them was not a crown or a burden or a power or a mandate, though it was all of those things at different moments. Mostly it was a tuning fork finding its note. Mostly it was the reason the music was right. Chapter 7, The Weight of What Remains. The ICW preparatory documents arrived on a Monday morning in mid-December, 6 weeks after the Wisengamot session, delivered by an owl so officious-looking it might have been commissioned specifically for the purpose, a large grey bird with a silver leg band and the bearing of someone who had been to finishing school. Hermione had the package open before the owl had finished rearranging its feathers. Harry watched her from across the office, where he was finishing a review of the Magical Beings Act's Third Amendment, and clocked the precise moment her expression shifted from receiving documents to "this is more complicated than expected," a small tightening around her eyes, a slight pause in the page-turning that indicated something had stopped her. "How bad?" he said. "Not bad, dense." She held up the first document. It was thick. "Bovise has been working on this for months, possibly longer." She read for another 30 seconds. "She's not asking for a treaty, she's asking for a classification." "What kind of classification?" "The ICW has a framework for exceptional magical entities, objects, creatures, phenomena that operate outside standard regulatory categories." She put the document down and looked at him. "She wants the sovereign binding classified under that framework." Harry sat with this for a moment. "She wants us classified as phenomena. As the binding, technically, but since the binding and the sovereigns are inseparable by definition." She gestured at the document. "Yes, effectively. What does that mean practically?" "It means the ICW gains regulatory oversight of anything the binding does that crosses an international magical boundary. It means our authority is real within Britain but requires ICW sign-off for anything with external implications." She picked the document back up. "And it gives Bovise the framework she's been trying to establish for 15 years, a body of international precedent that she controls the terms of." She looked at him. "It's actually quite elegant if you're Bovise, and if you're us, it's a cage with very nice furniture." She closed the document. "We need to respond to this before the meeting, not at the meeting, before it. If we walk into that room and this is still on the table, she controls the agenda." Harry stood, crossed the office, and sat on the edge of the table so he could read over her shoulder. "What's the counteroffer?" "I've been thinking about that since page 2. She opened her notebook to a page that was already half filled with dense writing. "The classification framework is actually useful. She's right that the binding needs an international legal definition. The problem isn't the concept, it's the jurisdiction it creates." She tapped her pen against the page. "What if we agree to the classification but propose a different oversight body? Not the ICW's existing regulatory committee, which Bovise chairs, but a new body jointly constituted with member representation from each magical territory." "Including Britain," Harry said. "Including the sovereigns themselves," she said, "as founding members with equal vote." She met his eyes. "She gets her classification framework. We get equal standing in the body that administers it. No one person controls the agenda." Harry looked at the notebook, at the pages she'd already filled, the way she'd built the argument from its foundation. "When did you start writing this?" "About 4 minutes ago." She said it without emphasis, as simple fact. He looked at her. The November morning light was coming through the office windows, and she had ink on 2 fingers, and the binding between them was doing the warm, settled thing it did when she was fully engaged with a problem. And he thought, not for the first time, that the ancient magic had chosen well. "Send it," he said, "before the end of the week. Give Bovise time to process it before the meeting. I want Kingsley's sign-off first." "He'll give it. He always approves the version that isn't a fight." "This might still be a fight. A different kind of fight," he said. "One we've already had the important part of." She looked at him. "How are you this confident about things you haven't done yet? How are you this prepared for things that haven't happened yet?" A pause. "Fair," she said, and turned back to the notebook. Draco Malfoy appeared in the doorway at 10:30 with a file folder under one arm, and the expression of a man who has been doing something difficult for several hours and has results. He knocked on the open door, which Harry had noticed was his consistent habit. Malfoy always knocked on open doors, always announced himself in rooms he wasn't certain of his standing in. It was one of those small, specific behaviors that told you a great deal about a person's recent history. "The Rookwood case," Malfoy said, holding up the folder. "Paris sent the updated charge sheet. I've been through it." "And," Harry said, "he's going to plead down." Malfoy came in and set the folder on the edge of Hermione's table, not on her papers, with the precision of someone who had learned the topography of Hermione's workspace through prior error. "The charges that will stick are the lesser ones: unauthorized use of a classified ritual instrument, conduct liable to destabilize the peace. The more serious charges require the testimony of another Inner Circle member, and Warrington's lawyer has already filed to have the relevant depositions excluded." "On what grounds?" Hermione said. "Procedural irregularity in the collection." He paused. "It's not wrong, actually. Fenn's team moved faster than the protocols require. The exclusion application might succeed." Harry looked at the charge sheet. "So Warrington walks on the dissolution ritual charges?" "On those charges, possibly. He still has the financial crimes, the conspiracy counts, the not family documents." Malfoy sat down in the chair across from Hermione's table. He'd claimed this chair over the past few weeks with the gradual confidence of someone testing permission by increments and finding it consistent. "He's not walking, he's walking less far than he should. The law being what it is," Harry said. "The law being what it is," Malfoy agreed, with the tone of someone who had grown up expecting the law to serve certain people and was still recalibrating around the notion that this was a problem rather than a feature. "There's something else." He opened the folder to the last page. Harry and Hermione both read it. It was a witness statement, 3 paragraphs, signed and notarized. "Who is Millicent Bulstrode's aunt?" Harry said. "A woman named Cassandra Flint, married name. She was a peripheral Hollow Court member, not in a circle, not fully initiated. She attended 2 meetings and then withdrew when the operational tone changed under Warrington." Malfoy paused. She watched what happened at the Wisengamot session. She sent the statement to Paris voluntarily. The statement described a conversation she'd witnessed between Warrington and Rookwood 6 months before the final battle, in which the dissolution ritual had been explicitly planned as a response to any sovereign binding, pre-planned, not reactive. It was minor in the context of the other charges, but it closed a gap in the timeline that Warrington's defense had been exploiting. Send it to Paris with a note that we consider it credible, Hermione said. Already did, Malfoy said. I wanted you to see it first, but I sent it last night when it arrived. Paris needed it for a filing today. He met Harry's eyes briefly. I should have waited. No, Harry said. The timing was right. You made the right call. He held Malfoy's gaze for a moment. You don't need to second-guess the operational decisions when the judgment is sound. Malfoy absorbed this with the particular expression of someone receiving something they've needed to hear for a while. Right, he said. The Aura application, Hermione said, not looking up from what she was writing. You submitted it. A brief pause. 2 days ago. Ron knows you're applying, Harry said, not a question. He'd been the one to suggest it to Ron, and Ron had been quiet for about 30 seconds and then said, yeah, all right, makes sense, with the tone of a man accepting an unexpected but logical development. He knows, Malfoy said. He was professionally courteous about it. Which from Weasley I take as warm endorsement. That's accurate, Harry said. Malfoy stood, took the folder back. At the door he paused, which was also his consistent habit. He always paused at doors, as though leaving a room required slightly more deliberation than entering one. The ICW documents, he said. I heard Beauvais is trying the classification angle. Harry looked at him. How do you hear these things? My mother maintains certain social connections that the family situation hasn't fully dissolved yet. He said this without elaboration, in the tone of someone who had decided to treat his family's remaining influence as a practical resource rather than a source of shame or pride. Beauvais has been discussing the classification framework in European circles for 3 months. She was expecting a single sovereign, the paired binding through her timeline. Through it how? She'd planned to frame the classification as protective, a framework to support an isolated individual carrying unusual responsibility. That narrative doesn't work for 2 people who are demonstrably functional and politically competent. He paused. She'll come to the meeting looking for a new angle. The classification framework might not be the opening move after all. Hermione looked up. What will be? Something personal, Malfoy said. That's her method. She identifies the thing a person most wants and builds the offer around it, makes the concession feel like a gift. He met Hermione's eyes. She'll do her research, she'll know what you want. What I want is the Magical Beings Act passed before spring session, Hermione said, and MACUSA's cooperation on the International Werewolf Registry reform, and she paused. There are 14 things. Beauvais will find the one that isn't policy, Malfoy said. He left. Harry looked at Hermione. He's right, she said before Harry could say it. I know, we need to talk about what we'd actually concede. She looked at her notes. Not what we pretend to concede, what we'd actually give ground on. Not the oversight structure, Harry said immediately. Agreed, not the oversight structure. She was quiet for a moment. The timeline could be flexible. She might want to delay ratification of the Charter's international recognition provision. 3 months, 6 months, could we live with that? Yes, it's inconvenient but not operationally critical. She wrote something. What about you? What would you concede? Harry thought about it. The consultation protocol. She'll want formal notice before any action that affects international magical boundaries. I'd give her 48 hours rather than the 24 we've been operating on. That's reasonable. She wrote that too, and the non-concessions, the classification structure. The jurisdiction of the oversight body, the independence of the Hogwarts offices from any international regulatory framework. He looked at her. And you, she looked up. Beauvais will try the personal angle, like Malfoy said. She'll find what you want and offer it wrapped in something that requires you to soften the oversight position. He held her gaze. We agree now, whatever she offers, it doesn't change the oversight structure. Hermione looked at him for a moment. You think she'll find something that's actually tempting? I think she's very good at her job, and you don't trust me not to be tempted. I trust you completely, he said, which is why I'm saying it out loud now while we're here before a very skilled diplomat has had 45 minutes with you. He paused. The same reason you made me agree to the chess thing, the NEWTS. Yes, she looked at him, then at her notes. Fine, she said, with the composure of someone acknowledging a fair point while wanting it on record that they could have handled it themselves. Agreed, the oversight structure is non-negotiable regardless of what she offers. Good, he moved toward the door. I'm going to the training ground. Again, Neville wants to work on something. He's been thinking about advanced shield charms. Neville is going to be the best defense teacher this school has ever had, Hermione said. I know. But he thinks he's not ready, so we keep working on it until the thought stops. Tell him the second years already think he's legendary. That might help. It'll terrify him for at least a week, Harry said, but I'll tell him. He went. She turned back to her work, and the office settled into its morning rhythm, and somewhere in the castle below students were arriving at their first lessons of the day with the sounds of an institution finding its pace again. The thing about building something, Hermione reflected on a Wednesday afternoon 3 days later, was that it required the same sustained attention as maintaining it, which people tended to forget. They thought of building as the exciting part and maintenance as the dull part, when actually both required the same quality of care. Building just had more visible milestones. She was in the archive. She came here most afternoons now, not for the sovereign-specific texts, she'd been through those thoroughly, but for the broader collection, the 8 centuries of magical scholarship that Rowena had assembled with the discrimination of someone who read everything and kept only what was genuinely worth keeping. The archive had texts on magical theory she'd never seen referenced anywhere else. Entire schools of thought that had apparently flourished and then disappeared, either suppressed or simply forgotten in the general attrition of time. She'd been writing summaries of them, cross-referencing with contemporary theory, building the academic framework for what she thought could become a complete reassessment of how magical education approached its own foundational principles. McGonagall had looked at the first summary and been very still for about 10 seconds. Then she'd said, "This needs to be published," with the specific weight of someone who does not use that phrase lightly, which was how Hermione had found herself corresponding with 3 academic journals simultaneously about a paper that was expanding in scope every week and showing no signs of stopping. She was in the middle of the 3rd section when the archive door opened. She didn't look up because Harry had developed the habit of coming to find her here in the afternoons, and the binding gave her a specific sense of his approach that was quite distinct from anyone else's. But the footstep pattern was wrong. She looked up. Narcissa Malfoy stood at the bottom of the stairs. She was exactly as Hermione remembered her from Malfoy Manor, composed, silver-haired, the posture of someone who had been bred for a particular kind of room and wore that breeding like armor even in rooms that didn't require it. She looked around the archive with the expression of someone recognizing something they didn't expect to find. "Madame Malfoy," Hermione said, because whatever else was true, the social form cost nothing. "Miss Granger." She didn't move from the bottom of the stairs. "I hope this isn't an intrusion. I came to see my son and he told me you might be here." A pause. "He said you wouldn't mind. I'm not certain he was right." "He was right," Hermione said. "Sit down." Narcissa moved to the chair across the table, the same chair Malfoy consistently used, which was either coincidence or genetics, and sat with the particular composed stillness of someone who has decided something and is delivering it. "He's applied to the Aura Core," she said. "I know. Because of you, because of what you've built here." She looked at Hermione directly, grey eyes that were different from her son's in a way that was difficult to name, colder or perhaps more practiced at being cold. "I want to understand what you intend. Regarding Draco, regarding all of it, he has stepped away from everything our family is. I understand why. I'm not certain I disagree with his reasoning." She paused, and this pause had a texture to it, the weight of something being said carefully. "I want to understand what he's stepping toward." Hermione looked at her. She was thinking about Adelaide Nott's letter, about 2 things being true simultaneously, about grief that was complicated rather than clean. Narcissa Malfoy had done one genuinely brave thing in the war. She'd lied to Voldemort, said Harry was dead, bought them the seconds that mattered. She'd done it to save her son, not from any broader principle, and the distinction was real, but the act itself was real too. "He's becoming someone who is useful in the ways that matter," Hermione said, "who uses what he knows, and he knows a great deal, in service of something that isn't just his family." She held Narcissa's gaze. "He's good at this. He has judgment and he has information, and he has the specific quality of someone who has examined his own history honestly and made decisions about it. That's rarer than the other things." Narcissa was quiet for a moment. "You trust him? Within the parameters that have been established?" "Yes." Hermione paused. "Which is not the same as trusting him completely, but it's real and it's growing, and he knows both of those things." "He does," Narcissa said. Something in her posture shifted, the very slight easing of something that had been held at tension. "His grandmother loved him," Hermione said. "That was real." Narcissa looked at her sharply. "It's in the letters," Hermione said simply. "Both things were true, the conviction and the love." She paused. "I think he knows that now." Narcissa was still for a long moment. Outside the archive, somewhere in the castle above them, there was the distant sound of students in a corridor, voices, the sound of feet on stairs, life continuing. "He said you built something here," Narcissa said. Her eyes moved to the shelves, the organized decades of scholarship, something that was intended for you specifically. "For whoever came," Hermione said. "We were whoever came." "Rowena Ravenclaw." Narcissa's voice had a quality to it, not reverence, something more complex. The voice of someone from an old family for whom the founders were not mythology but history. She was the greatest mind in 1,000 years of magical scholarship. "She was," Hermione agreed. "And she thought you were worth building this for. She thought whoever the binding named was worth building this for." Hermione looked at the shelves. "I don't know how to carry that except by trying to deserve it." Narcissa looked at her with an expression that was performing nothing, for perhaps the first time since she'd entered the room, the expression underneath all the composure and the breeding and the armor. Not soft exactly, genuine. "My son could have done worse," she said, for who he's choosing to become alongside." "Yes," Hermione said without false modesty, "he could have done considerably worse." And then, because Narcissa Malfoy was a woman who appreciated directness when it was offered as a courtesy rather than a weapon, "He's going to be fine, I want you to know that." Narcissa held her gaze for a moment, then she stood with the composed grace that was her most consistent quality and said, "Thank you for your time, Miss Granger." "Hermione," she said, a pause. "Hermione," Narcissa said with the specific quality of someone accepting something offered and left. The archive settled back into its amber quiet. Hermione turned to her notes and found she couldn't focus on the academic text for the next 10 minutes which she permitted. Some conversations needed a few minutes to metabolize. Harry found her there at 4:30 as she'd expected. He came down the stairs and looked at her expression and said, "What happened?" With the accuracy of someone reading a frequency only they could hear, she told him. He listened, sitting across from her with his elbows on the table, listening with the focused full-body attention he gave to things that mattered, which was one of his most significant qualities and which he'd spent years trying to teach people to notice because they kept looking at the more dramatic ones. When she was done, he was quiet for a moment. She wanted reassurance, he said. She wanted information. The reassurance was secondary. Hermione picked up her pen. She's making a decision about what her family is now. She needed to know what Draco is part of before she decided whether to be part of it too. What did you tell her? The truth. She paused. I think she'll come around, not quickly, but she's not. She stopped, finding the precision. She's not fixed is what I mean. She's capable of becoming different than what she is. I could see it. Harry looked at her. You could see it. I could feel the quality of it, she said, slightly self-conscious. The binding, probably it's been, she paused. I've been noticing it more, not just with the structural magic, with people, some kind of, I don't know the right word, resonance is overused at this point. Clarity, he said. She looked at him. You feel it too. Since the courtyard getting clearer, he paused. Not reading minds, more like the difference between hearing someone's words and understanding what they mean. Yes, she thought about this. We should document it for the archive. She opened her notebook to a fresh page which made Harry smile because it was the most predictably Hermione response to a developing unusual magical abilities that he could have imagined. After dinner, he said, I want to capture it while. After dinner, he said, in the voice that was the binding's clarity combined with the general certainty of a man who has decided. You've been in this archive for 3 hours. Come eat something. She looked at the notebook. 5 minutes. Hermione. She wrote 3 lines very quickly, capped the pen and stood up. Fine, that was 4.5 minutes. I'm efficient. She tucked the notebook under her arm. The archive will still be here. It's been here for 800 years, he agreed. It's not going anywhere. They came up from the archive together, back through the 3rd-floor corridor, and the castle was warm with the specific warmth of winter term beginning, fires in the grates, steam from the kitchens, the accumulated warmth of 500 people in an enclosed space that had always run warm. The enchanted ceiling showed a clear winter night, the stars the same ones he'd seen from the North Tower. He thought about Rowena saying they died because they believed they were alone in it. He thought about the way the binding felt now, not a thing imposed on him, not even a thing he carried, but something more like a structural feature of himself as fundamental as his own heartbeat, not limiting, defining in the way that being himself was defining. He thought about how strange it was that the most powerful thing that had ever happened to him had not made him feel powerful. It had made him feel real. Properly, solidly, unreservedly himself in a way he'd never quite managed on his own. You're thinking loudly, Hermione said beside him. Sorry, I didn't say stop. She glanced at him. What? Just thinking about the difference between what I expected the binding to be and what it actually is. What did you expect? Something heavier, he said. More demanding, more like the war was, where every day there was something that needed to be survived. He paused. This is different. The stakes are just as real, but the experience of it is, like choosing, she said. Yes, every day like choosing instead of reacting. She was quiet for a moment, walking beside him. I've been thinking about something Rowena said about Elara releasing the binding when she was ready. She paused. I don't mean now, I mean eventually, the idea of it, whether I'd be able to. Would you? He asked. She thought about it seriously, which was the only way she thought about things. I think so, she said, if the work was genuinely done, if what it was needed for was genuinely completed. She paused. But I'd want to know that what we built would hold without it. That's what we're doing, he said. Everything we're building, the charter, the being's act, the oversight body, the reformed auras, it's all designed to hold without us eventually. I know, she looked at him. Rowena's thing, building for futures you can't see. Yes, I find that. She stopped. What? Terrifying and completely necessary, she said, simultaneously. That's the correct response, he said, to most things worth doing. They came around the corner to the staircase down to the great hall and found Neville there, coming up from dinner with the specific expression of someone who has something to report. There's a letter, he said. Came to the hall during dinner, Ministry Owl Priority Band. He held it out to Harry. Also, George Weasley is here. He says he has something to show you, but I want to be very clear that I take no responsibility for whatever it is. Harry took the letter. Read it. Beauvais is moving the meeting forward, he said. 2 weeks. Hermione was already reading over his shoulder. She's found out about the counter-proposal, she said. Someone in Kingsley's office passed it along faster than it should have gotten to her. She straightened, which means she's had a day with it and she's already recalibrating. Good, Harry said. Keep saying that, Neville said. She's recalibrating because the proposal is good, Harry said. She's moving fast because she wants to get ahead of it, which means she's not going to be able to prepare as much as she planned. He folded the letter. 2 weeks is better for us than 3 months. Harry, Neville said with the tone of a man who has known someone for 7 years and is still occasionally astonished by them. You are much more suited to this than I would have expected in 3rd year. 3rd year me was a mess, Harry said. 3rd year you were 13, same thing. They went down to the Great Hall, where George Weasley was occupying one end of the Gryffindor table with the particular energy of a man who has a plan and an audience and considers these two things sufficient conditions for happiness. He was talking to Ron, who had apparently arrived at some point in the afternoon, and to a girl Harry didn't recognize, mid-20s, practical robes, the expression of someone who worked with George and had consequently developed a very high threshold for the unexpected. "Ah," George said when Harry and Hermione appeared. "The royal party, excellent, sit, I have a business proposition." "George," Ron said. "It's a good one," George said. "That's what you said about the self-spelling sock." The self-spelling sock was ahead of its time, and I stand by it. George looked at Harry with the bright-eyed energy that was one of his most consistent qualities, the energy that Fred had matched and which George now carried alone, louder sometimes than before, in the way of someone who has learned to be enough for two. "I want to open a Hogwarts branch." Harry looked at him. "Of the shop?" "Of Weasley's Wizard Wheezes, in Hogsmeade specifically. New location, new product line specifically designed for the current moment." He slid a folder across the table. "The rebuild is bringing people back to Hogsmeade. Foot traffic is up. The town needs, well, it needs everything, but specifically it needs something that makes people feel like the world is putting itself back together rather than just clearing rubble." Harry opened the folder. The product designs were typically George, inventive, irreverent, but the new line had a different quality to it, something lighter. The names were different too, less oriented toward chaos, more oriented toward delight. "The Reconstruction Collection," Harry said, reading the header. "I know the name needs work," George said. "I like it," Hermione said from beside Harry. George pointed at her. "Smart, always thought so." He leaned forward. "I'm not asking for money. I'm asking for a word, essentially. The Sovereigns of Magic blessing the reopening of a joke shop in Hogsmeade isn't exactly a formal endorsement, but it's a signal," Harry said, "that things are normal enough for jokes." "Exactly." George held his gaze. Something in his expression was doing more than the pitch. There was something underneath the business case that was more personal, the look of someone who needs to do something with his hands and his head to keep moving, who has found the specific form that works for him and needs it to be viable. Fred would have had this open by now. He would have, Harry said, and it would have had a sign that made McGonagall write 3 letters. He closed the folder. "You don't need our blessing, but you'll have it." He looked at Hermione. "Obviously," she said, "and I want 2 of whatever those are." She pointed at a product in the folder. George looked where she was pointing. "The constant revision charms, those are." "Hermione, those are study aids. I'm revising for NEWTS. I can have study aids that are also fun." She looked at him with an expression of complete composure. "Unless you have an objection." "No objection whatsoever," George said with the expression of someone who has just made the most personally satisfying sale of their career. "I'll put 2 aside." Ron looked at Harry with an expression of transparent delight. "She's doing the NEWTS thing." "I know. Are you doing the NEWTS thing?" "I said I'd think about it. It's been 3 weeks. I've been thinking." Harry. "All right, yes," Harry said with the specific composure of a man conceding a point he'd known was inevitable since the moment it was proposed. "I'm doing the NEWTS." Hermione's expression did not say "I told you so," which was genuinely impressive restraint. "When did you decide?" Ron asked. "Just now," Harry said, out loud, "which makes it real." He paused. "I want to understand more of what we're working with, the theoretical foundations. I've been operating on instinct and practical knowledge and the binding's own clarity, but the gaps are." He paused. "They bother me. I want to fill them properly." Neville, who had been listening from the far end of the table with the expression of someone taking notes, said quietly, "That is the most adult sentence you have ever said." "It's been a month of firsts," Harry said. George raised his cup of pumpkin juice. "To firsts," he said, "to rebuilding. To the Sovereigns of Magic having the wisdom to patronize a quality joke shop." He paused. "And to Fred, who would have been absolutely insufferable about all of this and whose absence is still, frankly, a structural problem in the universe that someone should look into." The toast went round. Ron's smile had the specific quality of grief and love that had been its texture for weeks, present in both simultaneously, not one becoming the other, both real. He held his cup up and met George's eyes, and the look between them contained everything that didn't need to be said. Harry raised his cup. So did Hermione. So did Neville. So did the girl from George's shop who had been introduced as Verity and turned out, over the next hour's dinner conversation, to be entirely self-possessed and very funny. The Great Hall did its thing, the thing it had always done, which was hold people together in the ordinary intimacy of shared food and conversation, the ceiling showing its winter stars, the fires in the fireplaces warm against the December cold. 2 days before the ICW meeting, Hermione received something she hadn't expected, a letter from her parents. Not their first contact since she'd restored their memories in Australia 8 months ago. She'd been back twice, both visits short and complicated in the specific way of relationships that have been interrupted by something too large to fully explain. The first visit she'd spent mostly crying, which she hadn't been able to prevent and hadn't tried to. The second had been more functional, more like relearning the grammar of a relationship she'd been speaking fluently since childhood but had lost access to for a year. Her mother had made tea exactly the way she always made tea, and her father had asked careful questions about everything and had not once said anything that could be described as an insufficient response. This letter was from both of them, which was unusual. They generally wrote separately, each with their particular style. Together was deliberate. She read it in her office alone in the morning before Harry arrived. It was long. It covered things she'd told them and things they'd worked out themselves and things they'd clearly discussed with each other over many evenings, the accumulated processing of people who loved someone very much and were only now beginning to understand the full scope of what that person had done and been. Her mother wrote about a conversation she'd had with a Muggle colleague who'd asked why she seemed different lighter, and she'd said, "My daughter is safe and found," that was enough. Her father wrote about the archive, which she told him about in careful terms, and about Rowena Ravenclaw, and said something that made her put the letter down and look at the window for a moment. "It sounds to me like you found a home in the fullest sense of the word. Not just a place to live, but a place that was waiting for you specifically. I think that's the rarest thing there is." She read the letter through twice and then folded it carefully and put it in the drawer where she kept things she wanted to be able to find. Harry arrived 20 minutes later with tea and found her at her desk looking out the window at the winter grounds, the snow that had fallen overnight making the castle grounds clean and white and simple. "What?" he said in the way he said it when the question was open rather than specific. "My parents wrote." She turned from the window. "Good letter." He set the tea down in front of her. He didn't try to elaborate on it or ask for more detail because he understood, as he'd always understood, the exact proportion of space a thing needed to sit in. "Good," he said. "My father said Hogwarts is a home that was waiting for me specifically." She paused. "He doesn't know about the archive, not really, but he got there from what I told him." "Your father is very clever," Harry said. "He's an NHS dentist from Hampstead," she said. "He's also the most perceptive person I've ever met, excluding possibly Rowena and you." Harry looked at her. "You think I'm perceptive? I think you read people at a depth that you systematically underestimate because you've never been in an environment that valued it." She held his gaze. "Which is one of the things we're going to fix, in the long run." He looked at her for a moment. "What do you mean?" "The NEWTS are part of it," she said, "but also there's a course, a module McGonagall's agreed to, Magical Theory and Applied Understanding, 6th and 7th years." She paused. "I want you to teach the practical component." "Hermione, I'm not a teacher. You're the best practical magical educator I've ever seen, including every professor in this building," she said. "You ran the DA at 15, you've been training Neville and the others for 3 weeks and they've all improved more than a term's worth of formal instruction would have produced." She met his eyes. "You communicate how to do magic in a way that people actually understand. That's a specific and significant skill." A pause. "I'm not asking you to do it alone. I'll take the theoretical component. We'd be teaching together." Harry was quiet for a moment. She watched him move through the objections, the self-deprecation, the comparison to people who had formal training, the general instinct to point the credit elsewhere, and watched him come out the other side of them at the place he'd been moving toward for a month, the place where he accepted that what he was good at was worth being good at without apology. "When does it start?" he said. "Spring term," she said. "Which gives you the NEWTS to work with first." She looked at him. "Also, your transfiguration technique in the second module has a gap that I want to address before you're teaching it to other people. There's nothing wrong with my transfiguration technique. There's a very small efficiency issue in how you initiate the secondary transformation. Show me." She took out her wand. He took out his. And for the next 20 minutes they worked through it, back and forth, demonstrating and adjusting and demonstrating again, the specific intimacy of two people who have always learned best in conversation with each other. And outside the windows the winter grounds were white and clean and the castle held them in its 47 enchantment warmth. And this was, as her father had said, exactly right, home. The night before the ICW meeting they sat in the archive, not working. Just there, the amber light doing its work, the 8 centuries of Rowena's collection around them. Harry was reading something that had nothing to do with anything urgent, a text on the theoretical history of elemental magic that Hermione had recommended 3 weeks ago because she'd thought he'd find it interesting and had been right. She was writing in her journal, the personal one, not the research one, in the reflective way she wrote when she was processing rather than building. "What are you thinking about?" he said without looking up from the text. "Bovice," she said. "What about her? Whether she's genuinely concerned or genuinely ambitious, whether those are different things." She paused. "Malfoy said she'll try the personal angle. I've been thinking about what she could offer that would actually be tempting." "What would it be?" She put down her pen. "Endorsement of the Magical Beings Act at the ICW level," she said. "International recognition binding on member territories. It would accelerate everything by years." She paused. "If she offered that in exchange for softening the oversight structure." "We agreed," he said. "I know we agreed." She looked at him. "I'm telling you now because you were right. It would be genuinely tempting, and knowing it's coming makes it easier to say no clearly." She held his gaze. "The oversight structure matters more than the acceleration, even years." "Yes," he said. Because if we give her the structure now, every version of this conversation we have for the next decade starts from a position we've already conceded. She picked up her pen. So no, he agreed. She wrote for a moment. He read. The archive breathed around them, amber and old. Harry, she said, what's the word for when something is exactly what it should be? He looked up from the text, thought about it. Right, he said, that's the word. She considered this. It's not a very impressive word for the feeling. Some feelings don't need impressive words, he said. They just need accurate ones. She looked at him with the full, direct attention she'd been giving him for years without fully acknowledging what she was giving it with. This is right, she said. All of it. The work, the archive, the building, being here with you. She paused. I want to say it clearly because Rowena's texts are very specific about the importance of naming things clearly. I know, he said. I read the same texts. And he set the book down. This is right, he said. I've known that since the courtyard, and I've known some version of it since much longer ago than that. He held her gaze with the full, deliberate attention that was his most telling quality. You're the person this all means with. She took this in, let it settle at its proper depth. The person it means with, she repeated. That's good. I have moments, he said. You have more moments than you give yourself credit for, she said, which was what she always said, and it was always true. Outside the archive, the castle settled into its winter night. The snow on the grounds reflected the starlight, and the corridors above were quiet with sleeping students, and the fires burned low in the grates of the common rooms, and Hogwarts did what it always did, which was hold everything it was asked to hold and keep it safe in the fabric of its ancient walls. Tomorrow, Bovi's the ICW meeting, the next version of the problem. Tonight, the archive, the amber light, the accumulated knowledge of 8 centuries and 2 people who had been named by something older than any of it, sitting in the home it had built for them, being exactly what they were. Which was, as Harry had said, right, the accurate word, the only one needed.